There is a man the world has chosen. He does not know what stands behind him. I have been waiting for this for a long time.
Senior brother, is everything all right?
I woke up because something inside me remembered dying. The cold was still in my arms. The taste of the formation poison was still in the back of my throat. The last face I had seen, careful, calculating, untroubled by anything resembling apology, was still behind my eyes when I opened them. The eyes that opened were the wrong eyes. The hands at my sides were the wrong hands, narrow at the wrist, soft at the knuckles. The faint silver-white pattern on the inside of my left wrist sat clean and unscarred, washed of the burn I had carried for years, the burn from the day I had healed someone else's experiment because he had asked me to. I had healed it. He had thanked me. He had thanked me a great deal over the years. He had also, at the end of those years, poisoned me. I sat up slowly. The ceiling above me was a ceiling I had not slept under in 20 years. 20. I let the number land the way a cold poison lands in the chest. It went down without fanfare. It did not feel like a miracle. It felt like a debt being paid by the wrong party. Heaven, for reasons heaven did not bother to share, had given me back a body I had owned at 20 years old, and the entire span of years between that body and the one I had died in. I knew exactly what was about to happen in those years. I knew because I had lived them. I knew the names of every person I had bled for. I knew the names of every person I had killed because someone I had once trusted had wanted them killed. I knew the day that someone would decide gratitude was no longer a useful posture toward me, and the day he would decide to remove me, and the small, precise sequence of decisions he would make in between. I had spent 2 decades being the most thorough resource in someone else's rise. I was not going to spend the next 2 doing it again. I did not weep. I did not panic. I had spent the seconds of my dying wishing I had been the kind of man who could have flinched at the right moment weeks earlier when there had still been time to read what I was reading and refuse it. I had not been that man. That was the wound. The wound was not the betrayal. The wound was the version of myself that had let it happen. What I told myself, in a voice that was not quite mine yet because the body it was coming out of had not finished agreeing to belong to me again, was that the wound was now an asset. I had been the largest single contributor to his rise. I was about to be its largest expense. The thought sat there. After a while, I noticed I was breathing again, slow and even, the rhythm of a man working. I stood up. A knock arrived at my door. 3 taps. Careful, considerate, exactly inside the threshold of polite. The kind of knock a junior brother gives when he wants to be sure he is not interrupting and also wants to be sure he is heard. I knew the knock. I had heard it for 20 years. His voice came through the wood, bright and slightly anxious, exactly tuned to the version of me who would have rushed to the door the day before yesterday in a previous life. He called for senior brother. He asked me to open quickly. I knew the voice. It was the voice of the junior brother I had been hearing on the other side of this door for 2 decades. The voice of the man who would, in 20 years and a few weeks, look at me with a calculation in his eyes that did not bother with apology and finish what the poison in his hand had started. His name was Ethan. He had been a careful student of my routines. Now I knew why. I crossed the room and opened the door. He stood in the corridor with his hand still half raised from the last knock. Same face. Slightly childish at the cheek, slightly mature at the eye. The mismatch he had always carried that I had once read as an honest face still finding itself. Now I knew the mismatch was deliberate. He had practiced it. He had decided which part of his face to trust the audience with. Junior brother, the killing intent that came up my throat was the cleanest emotion I had felt in 2 lives. I swallowed it the way you swallow a hot drink you do not want to spit. He was looking at me. The corridor was empty. The sect was waking up around us. Killing him in the doorway of my own residence at dawn was the kind of thing that solved 1 problem and created 12. So the heat went down into my chest and stayed there. He asked, in the careful voice of a junior brother, concerned about a senior brother's well-being, whether I had suffered some manner of chi deviation in the night. He had heard a sound from outside, he said. He had been worried. A small laugh almost moved in my chest. A small issue with my cultivation, I said. Nothing worth the bother. The lie came out smooth. The same lie I had told him in another life. In this same doorway, after a different bad night. He had remembered it. He had counted on it. He had built today around it. He smiled. He said something pleasant about the weather, about the medicinal herbs of the season, about a small matter that had brought him to my door. The transition was so practiced I could feel the seams in it now. He was going to ask me for something. The weather was the lubricant. moment. While he was working through the small talk, the air in front of my eyes folded over, and a panel I had never seen before unfolded in clean, cold light. My face did not move. 2 decades of training my face. The lines of text settled into my vision, while my mouth produced an appropriate noise, and my body did not move. The panel said, "All Heavens Luck Stealing System, bound to host." Below that, lines began to fill in. Target, Ethan, realm, late stage meridian opening. Affection toward host, tool for use, tool for use. For 20 years I had tried to choose between the readings of his face. Now there was a phrase under my eyes that said the reading was not actually a question. The panel kept going. Innate luck, child of destiny, 6 stars. Turning danger into fortune, 5 stars. Path to death, 4 stars. Acquired luck, idiot's blessing, 3 stars. 3-year agreement, 3 stars. A small descriptive line scrolled at the bottom. Idiot's blessing, a fortune attribute that channels the loyal labor of an unwitting attendant directly into the child of destiny's accumulation. The attendant gains nothing. The child of destiny gains everything. Recommendation: clear all luck before terminating the host. The attendant was me. The recommendation was a permission slip. In the time it took him to finish his sentence about the herbs, I understood the shape of what had been put in my hand. The world had been built for this man. The world had a spreadsheet for it. The spreadsheet was now in my hand, and the system would only continue to function if I cleared every entry on his panel before I removed him from his. He was already transitioning, smoothly, into the actual reason he was here. His mother, he said, had grown worse overnight. The cold poison in her chest had spread. He was not a healer. He was begging Senior Brother's mercy. If I could find a moment to send a remedy, a pill, anything from the Profound Peak's reserves, he would carry the debt for as long as he lived. He bowed slightly. The bow was perfect. He had practiced it. I knew this scene. I had lived this scene. In another life, I had given him a king-grade medicinal pill from my own storage, a pill I had been saving for my own breakthrough, and sent him on his way with a hand on his shoulder and the kind of warmth a senior brother gives a junior brother whose mother is dying. I had not gone in person. I had been busy. I had thought it was kindness. I had thought it had been received as kindness. It had not been. The pill had cured Catherine. Catherine had not remembered me. Ethan had not reminded her. 20 years later, when he had me kneeling in a stone formation, neither of them was in the room. I let him finish his bow. "I'll go in person." He looked up. There was a half second in which his face had not yet decided which expression to wear. He chose grateful. He chose moved. He produced something just under the volume of impolite, about how he could not possibly trouble Senior Brother to that extent, that a remedy would be more than enough, that he ran out of words when I let the silence settle. "I'll go in person," I said again. The pause I left after each next word was deliberate. "I will take very good care of her." He did not hear what I had loaded into the words. He nodded. He bowed again. He thanked me a third time. He invited the heavens to bear witness to my virtue. He left, walking backward 2 steps before turning, the small theatrical retreat of a man who has just successfully extracted a favor and does not want to advertise the fact. The door closed behind him. The system panel hung in my vision a moment longer. Catherine was not yet entered on it. The system was waiting for me to be in her presence. It would scan her then. I could already feel, the way a chess player feels 3 moves before the move arrives, what her attributes would tell me. Whatever was burning her down had been put there by something that had known where to put it. The cold poison had not been a misfortune. It had been a script, and Ethan was reading the script the same way he had read every script, without ever realizing he was holding paper. I left the bedchamber. The peak was waking up below me. By the time I reached the staircase down, my cultivation had assembled itself underneath me like a second body remembering its purpose, and the wind I rode out of the sect lifted my robes, the way a flag is lifted by an army that has not yet announced itself. Northbrook sat at the bottom of a flight of mountains a quarter of an hour by sword. I made the trip in less. The wind off the higher peaks pulled at the lower hem of my robes. The cold I had felt in the bedchamber stayed where I had left it. I came down through the cloud line. The city opened underneath me. Terracotta roofs, terraced courtyards, the small mortal market I had never paid attention to in the previous life because I had been the kind of senior brother who flew over things. I paid attention now. The Ethan family residence was a long compound of curved eaves and a gate guarded by stone lions that had been carved by someone who had cared. I noted that as well. I had not noticed before that there had been pride in the carving. I noted everything I had not noticed. My boots touched down on the inner courtyard's pale flagstones. A man came out of a side door at almost a run, elderly, gray at the temple, dressed in the tidy dark robes of a steward, the kind of man who had been managing the gates of his master's mortal life for 40 years and had developed strong opinions about who was permitted to land in the inner courtyard without an invitation. He demanded in the loudest voice he was willing to commit to in front of his master's house who I was and how I dared to trespass on the Ethan family. I let him say his line. The silence afterward did the work. A fragment of my cultivation aura settled on the stones around us. Not enough to crack anything, just enough to make the air thicker, the way it gets thicker when a storm is choosing whether or not to commit. The man's mouth lost its expression first, then his knees did. He went down on the cobblestones in the formal kowtow he had probably practiced at the elbow of his own master decades ago, a gesture he had not used in years and had remembered all at once. He stammered. He was reckless, he said. He had not known the chief of the Heavenmark sect had arrived. He begged this one's pardon. He begged it again. Ignorance is no sin. My hand lifted once. Rise, he rose. His head stayed down. He kept his eyes on the gap between my boots. I told him I had come at the request of junior brother Ethan to attend to the matter of his mistress's health. I asked him to take me to her as quickly as he could move, and to dismiss anyone else who might otherwise have been in the inner garden at this hour. He bowed, he turned, he led. 2 more courtyards passed under our feet. The third opened onto a small private garden, a willow tree, a stone bench, a lacquered walkway. The butler stopped at the gate, bowed, and stayed where he was. Halfway down the walkway, leaning against a low wooden railing for balance, was a woman. She was paler than she should have been, in the specific way the 100 evil cold poison takes color out of a person from the inside. Her hair was still long and dark, drawn loosely back from a face that had been arranged on better days. The shape of her was still there, soft at the cheek, full at the line of the throat, but she was using one hand on the railing to keep her balance, and the other to hold a sleeve over a small dry cough. She heard the walkway shift under my boots and looked up. The system folded itself open in front of my eyes again, faster this time, automatic. Catherine, realm, early profound stage. Cultivation suppressed by the 100 evil cold poison. Eruption window, within 1 day. Fate class, woman of great luck. Innate attributes scanning. 2 5-star entries detected. Heavenly Phoenix bloodline. Virtuous wife and prosperous husband. The system paused on the second one. It paused the way a man pauses on a coin he has just realized is the coin he is owed. Virtuous wife and prosperous husband. 20 years of Ethan's quiet luck. The breakthroughs that arrived just as he needed them. The pills that fell into his hands. The women who did not look away when they were supposed to. A solid half of it, sitting under a willow tree, leaning on a railing, coughing into her own sleeve. She finished her cough. She lifted her head. Her voice came thin and low, the voice of a woman who was using words she could not afford. "Are you?" she asked. "Chief Adrian?" I crossed the last of the walkway and stopped at the edge of her shadow. Her shadow was longer than mine in the noon sun. I noted that too. "I am," I said. I did not smile. I did not need to. She was already lowering her head in a gesture of relief. She had been told her son had asked for help. She had been told help would arrive. She had not been told what shape help would arrive in. Behind me, the latch of the inner gate fell. The willow shifted in a wind I had not felt arrive. I had walked into the first room of the next 20 years of Ethan's life. He had handed me the key. The system finished its scan a beat after I answered her. Catherine, luck, 6,000, affection, stranger, realm, life gate middle stage, innate, heavenly phoenix bloodline, 5 stars, virtuous wife and prosperous husband, 5 stars, acquired, cold tribulation nirvana, 3 stars, 2 5-star entries on the same panel. I had spent 20 years in a cultivation world watching protagonists pull resources out of midair, and I had never once seen 2 5-star entries on the same panel. She had been told her son had a kind senior brother. She had not been told the senior brother had been reborn from a death he had personally signed for and was looking at her with the expression a man gives to a treasury door whose key has just turned in his hand. I let the silence go on slightly too long. She felt it. She raised her sleeve to cover the small dry cough she had been holding. Her cheeks took on a faint color, the kind that comes back into a sick face when the patient remembers, briefly, that she is also a woman. "Forgive me." My eyes lowered with deliberate slowness. I was looking at the path of the cold poison through the meridians. I should have been more discreet. She did not believe me, exactly. But she accepted the explanation in the way a polite woman accepts a polite lie. Then she corrected me, softly, with a small smile that had more dignity than her cough deserved. that she was no longer young, that she was a mother, and that the address of Miss was not a word that fit her any longer. I bowed my head. Aunt Yun, then. Henry had drifted closer at the gate. He could no longer hold his question. He stepped onto the walkway and asked, in a voice at the edge of breaking, what the diagnosis was. I let him have it clean. 100 evil cold poison, I said. His face went. His knees went next. He landed on the lacquered walkway and the sound was too loud for the willow's quiet. He begged. He begged in the cracked voice of an old man who had carried a child. He begged for the matriarch's life, for the sake of the senior brother bond, for any mercy I would offer. I let him beg. The begging was a small, useful thing. It was also the right shape of grief for the room. I can treat it. My eyes returned to Catherine. But the work is not work that can be done with witnesses. I will require a private room, alone with her. The garden took a slow breath. The butler did not protest. He could not. He had spent his anger and his fear in the same sentence, and he had nothing left. Catherine looked at me for a long moment. She had heard exactly what I had said and exactly what I had not said. She was a woman who had survived as a loose cultivator, raising a son with less than she had inherited in a world where every bargain came in 2 flavors. She was making one now. She inclined her head. Then please, young Master Adrian, let us go inside. The bedroom was clean in the way a sick room is clean, a kind of cleanliness that meant her servants had been afraid to touch anything. A low bed, a screen, a brazier with a thin trail of medicinal smoke. Her perfume was barely there underneath it. Henry came in behind us. He was hovering. He had not been asked into this room, and he had also not been asked to leave it, and he had decided, in the small private theology of a butler whose mistress was the only thing he had left to protect, that he would not make me ask twice. I let my eyes find his. I did not say anything. The aura I had used in the courtyard returned, this time inside a closed room, focused. Henry did not stagger. His body found the doorway on its own, walking him backward without his permission, and he left murmuring something he did not afterward remember saying. The door closed behind him. Catherine spoke before I could turn. You did not need to do that to him. Her voice was kinder than her words. He is loyal. He was only worried. I looked at her. I know. She did not sit. She was still using the bedpost for balance. Her hair was undone in a way I had not noticed in the garden, a single loose strand against the side of her neck, and the cold had drawn the color out of her cheeks again now that she was no longer in the sun. I know what you have done for my son, she said. He told me, the senior brother who pulled him from outer disciple to true disciple. He speaks of you the way a son speaks of a debt he cannot pay. A small laugh moved in my chest. I kept it where it belonged. He is generous. My voice was even. Junior brother is easy to help. Her eyes moved over my face, the way a person looks at a key before deciding which lock it fits. She had not asked me what kind of treatment I was about to perform. She had not asked what privacy was for. She had been a loose cultivator long enough to know there were treatments that required silence, and she had been a mother long enough to know there were silences that bought a future. She let go of the bedpost. The 2 steps to me cost her something. By the time she crossed the distance, she was leaning. Her hand came up to my chest, then to the side of my jaw, and her mouth was on mine before I had finished deciding which arm to catch her with. The storm broke outside the window before the kiss ended. Not weather, not the kind of storm that rolls down a coast. The sky over Northbrook lit white and stayed white for the count of 3. The air pressure in the room shifted. The brazier's coal hissed against a sudden cold that pushed in through nothing. Heaven had noticed. Heaven did not approve. She heard it. Her eyes closed harder. She did not pull away. I did the work I had come to do. The cold poison left her in stages. The heavenly phoenix bloodline began to stir under it like an animal that had been waiting under thin ice for years. By the time she was breathing easily, she was also asleep, her body too exhausted to hold consciousness now that the thing inside it was gone. I covered her. The system was already speaking by then. The system spoke in the order it had been waiting to speak. Luck stripped from target Ethan, 3,000. Luck stripped from target Catherine, 1,000. Chi luck value awarded to host, 4,000. Cultivation technique reward, divine elephant suppressing prison strength. Tool reward, 10,000 transformations, slave seal. Bonus reward, newbie gift pack. Contents, Supreme Tao Foundation. Saint Realm, War Slave. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands on my knees and let the panel pour itself into me. Each line was a year of Ethan's life I would not have to spend. The system added a final line in the smaller scrolling font it used for its own observations. Anomaly does not affect good fortune. The virtuous wife and prosperous husband attribute is currently effective on host. I had wondered. I had also stopped wondering when she had stepped off the bedpost. There were 2 truths in the same room now. The truth she had been told, That the senior brother who had been kind to her son had become more than that to her was a truth she had decided. The other truth had been written on a panel I had never shown her. I checked my own template. Anomaly. No innate luck. No acquired luck. Detached from fate. Infinite possibilities. A man with no luck is a man no destiny can predict. The script in this world had been written for the children. Mine was a blank page. I considered the slave seal. Not for long. The system clarified the calculus immediately. The 10,000 transformations. Slave seal could not bind a person of great luck. Catherine's luck had been 6,000 at the start of the day and was probably climbing now that her bloodline was waking up. The seal would not hold. That was not the only reason I closed the option. I closed it anyway. She did not stir on the bed. Her breathing had evened. The faint blue at her temples had receded. The strand of hair against her neck had been tucked back without my noticing that I had done it. I stood up. I had 2 more pieces of work to finish before dawn. Henry was waiting at the end of the corridor. He had been waiting for hours. He had a kettle in his hands he had probably forgotten he was holding. When he saw me close the door behind myself, his eyes searched my face in a way that asked, without his throat managing the words, whether his mistress was alive. She is sleeping. I let my hand pass briefly across the kettle's lid as I walked. The cold poison is gone. She will need a day. His knees softened. He did not go down on them. He had gone down on them once already today, and he was using the last of his composure to spare me the second. He bowed his head instead. I kept walking. Walk with me. There is something we need to discuss. He followed. We did not walk far. The Ethan residence's back wall opened onto a strip of pine on the slope of the hill, and the slope of the hill held an empty grove a man could shout in without being heard from the house. I had walked the grove in a previous life with a different butler. The trees were already old then. They were older now. I let go of him in the center of the grove and did the work that had to come next. I will not describe it in detail. He had been a loyal man. He had also, in his loyalty, been willing to write to Ethan tonight a letter that began with the word concerned and ended with everything he had seen of me from the moment I had landed in his master's courtyard. The letter would have left tonight. The letter could not leave tonight. I broke what needed to be broken. I did not break it for sport. I broke it for speed. By the time I was finished, his old body was on the pine needles, at angles his body had not been designed to make, and his eyes, when I lifted his chin to look into them, were the eyes of a man who understood that I would also kill him if that was where his answer left me. My finger lifted, slow, to the center of his forehead. Open your heart. Accept the seal. I will spare you. He did not say I am willing. He was beyond that. He nodded once, just enough to be visible. The slave seal entered him through the spirit, not through the skin. He shuddered. His ribs lifted in a long, ragged breath. The thing inside him that had been the loyalty of 40 years to the Ethan family rearranged itself, in silence, into the loyalty of one terrified evening to me. I gave him a healing pill. I told him to swallow it. He swallowed it. Crawl back, I said. I let the words sit alone in the trees a moment. Take the long path through the orchard. The maids will find you in the morning. You will tell them you tripped on the wall. He nodded again. I left him there. I left the grove and walked the hill until the city's lanterns were small below me. I spoke the system's command word inward, and the air in front of me opened in a way the panel did not, a door without a frame. Through the door, for a moment, I saw a long, strange light show. Figures, more than I could count. The kind of figures cultivation poets call gods and demons, because cultivation poets do not know what else to call them. The light fixed on one of them. He stepped through. He was a monk, tall, robust, with a fleshy red bead between his eyebrows, and a single faded dragon tattoo down the line of his right shoulder. The kasaya he wore had not been new in centuries. He was holding a Zen staff in his left hand, casual, the way you hold a thing you have used 1,000 times and will use again. His killing intent reached me before he did, the way a fire reaches you before its flame. The system labeled him War Slave, Realm, Saint Early Stage, True Form, Maharaga. I knew the name. I had read the name once, 1,000 years ago, in a previous life, in a story I had thought was a story. He folded forward. Both hands came together. The staff did not waver. Master. His voice carried the weight of something that had been preserved underground for a long time. Please command this humble monk. I did not return the bow. Hide in the void, I said. Surface only when I summon you, or when my life is in real danger, not before, as the master decrees. He went where I had told him to go. The light he had stepped out of folded itself shut behind him. I stood on the hill alone again, with a few less reasons to look over my shoulder. The Ethan residence had 11 full members of its household staff. I learned this by counting as Henry having crawled back through the orchard exactly as instructed, produced them one by one before the brazier in the main hall. 7 maidservants, 3 menservants, the butler himself. I sat in Catherine's husband's old chair, which the family no longer used and had not bothered to put away, and I worked through them one at a time. The slave seal was a thing the spirit accepted faster when there was no resistance. Henry's terror, present in the room beside them, was an effective preacher. None of them resisted long. I came to the second to last name on his list, Emily. She came forward in the small, careful steps of a young woman who had not been told why she had been called from her bed. Her hair was barely tied. Her eyes were still warm with sleep. The system wrote her on my panel without my asking. Emily. Realm. Below body refinement. Acquired luck. None. Future trajectory in original timeline. God King Realm under Ethan's protection over 20 years. The original timeline had given her to him. The original timeline was not running anymore. She blushed when she got close enough to see my face. She had heard, she said, that a peerless, handsome young man had come to the residence. She had not believed them. Her eyes went down. She asked, soft, whether I was the expert who had come to treat the matriarch. You are Emily. She looked up. She did not understand the line. The system had told me her name, and I had used it as if I knew her, and that was a thing she had no map for. You should not have met me yet. My finger lifted toward her forehead. It is unfortunate timing for you. I drove the seal in. She gasped and fell. Her body convulsed. Her hands clawed once at the marble. The few seconds before the seal finished were the only seconds of resistance her spirit was allowed. I let it finish before I lifted her. When her breathing returned, she was on her knees in front of the chair, and I had not moved. Her words came out small and thin. Why? Master? Why? I did not answer. There was no version of an answer that was useful to her now. I let the silence be its own response. Then I told her what she would do. She would return to the Heaven Mark sect with Ethan in a few days. She would attend him. She would report on him. She would never raise his name to me again with any honorific her mouth had carried in this house. The next time she said young master, she would not be saying it about him. She lowered her head. She slipped once in the next sentence. The slip was instinct, not defiance. She used the words, my young master, the way she had used them every day of her life until tonight. The slap was not loud. The mark on her cheek told the story. You belong to me, I said, not him. You will not say his name with any word he has not earned. Yes, master. Her head lowered until her hair touched the marble. Emily was clumsy. Emily is your most loyal slave. There is no one but you. I rose from the chair. The house was mine before the sky had named the hour. I walked out through the front door of the Ethan residence with the faintest gray of false dawn on the courtyard stones, and my breath visible in the cold, and I did not look back. There was nothing in the house I could not now reach across any distance. She woke before I did. I had slept the way men sleep in foreign rooms, half awake, listening, the cultivation ready under the surface. Catherine did not realize she had woken me. She lay against my shoulder for a moment before she lifted herself onto her elbow to look at me, and the look on her face was not the look I had been planning to receive. The cold poison was gone. The blue at her temples had been replaced by the faint warm flush of someone whose blood was working again. Her hair had come loose. Her eyes had something in them that she had probably not chosen. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. I must thank young Master Adrian properly for what he has done for me. Still calling me young master? I asked. She blushed harder than the cold poison had ever let her blush. The next word came small. Husband. I produced the pill from my storage ring before she finished saying it. It was pure white, fingertip sized, no marking on it of grade or sect. I had been carrying it the entire way from Profound Peak. Before the rebirth, I had eaten pills of this grade like meals. The Adrian clan had stocked them in the children's wing, the way other families stocked sweet cakes. I knew exactly what the pill was and exactly what it would do, and the story I was about to tell about it was a story I had spent the night composing. My mother, I said, left this for the woman I would one day decide to keep. She looked at the pill. She looked at me. The two looks were trying to occupy the same expression and failing. I told her the rest of the story slowly, the way you tell a story to someone whose belief is the thing you are constructing. The pill, I said, was made from the essence blood of 100 ancient heaven phoenixes, a treasure beyond anything the cultivation world produced anymore. It would take a body that had a phoenix bloodline asleep inside it and wake the bloodline up. It was the kind of gift a man gives a woman exactly once. I was giving it to her now. I did not tell her that her phoenix bloodline had begun to wake up the previous night, the moment her cold poison left, and that the pill on my palm was an Adrian clan activation pill of the entry tier, and that the only thing the pill was about to do was confirm a thing already happening. She was the kind of woman who could read the gap in a story when she was looking for one. She was not looking for one this morning. She kissed me before I had finished the last sentence. The kiss landed cleanly. The pill went between her teeth and into her throat in the same movement, the way a thing you have already decided to swallow gets swallowed. She closed her eyes. She held me a moment longer. Then the bloodline answered the pill. The cry came first. It was not a sound her throat made. It was a sound that came up from underneath her, from a place older than the body she was using to make it, and it climbed her ribs and her sternum and her open mouth on its way out into the room. The room was not built for it. The walls began to give. I lifted her up off the bed and stepped backward. The phoenix shape, when it appeared, was not behind her exactly. It was through her, vast, crimson, the wing spread and crested head of a bird I had read about in scrolls written by men who had never seen it. The shape was emerging through her shoulders and back, as though it had been folded up inside her ribs since she was born, and had only just now remembered how to be the size it actually was. Heaven was already responding. The pressure in the air shifted. Saint Level eyes, somewhere far away, would be turning toward Northbrook inside the next breath. I did not have a breath to spare for politeness. My voice was even. Fahai, now! The void opened next to me. Fahai stepped out of it, bare-shouldered, Kasaya already coming off the arm. He did not ask what the matter was. The matter was visible. Master. He folded the Kasaya across his palm. Kasaya subduing demon divine ability. The robe expanded. It did not unfold the way fabric unfolds. It opened like a system panel, dimension first and surface afterward, and by the time it had crossed the courtyard wall, it was already 100 times its original size. It came down over the Ethan residence, the way a man drops a blanket over a candle. The world above the Kasaya stayed quiet. Inside it, the phoenix kept climbing. The cry kept going. The walls of Catherine's bedroom collapsed outward in slow elegance. Masonry that had stood for 60 years giving way to a thing that should not have been allowed inside any room shorter than the sky. I held her. I did not know why I was holding her. The system had already finished telling me what was happening. The heavenly phoenix bloodline awakening. The cold tribulation. Nirvana attribute discharging the cold poison's stored years all at once. The cultivation level climbing in the absence of anyone to argue with it. Holding her was not a thing I was holding her for. Fahai sat cross-legged on the Kasaya's edge above the residence and watched the phoenix burn. I held her until she was light enough to need holding less, and then I held her anyway. The system had been waiting. It opened the next reward into my vision while I was still walking out of the destroyed bedroom. The newbie gift pack, the thing I had been holding in reserve since the night before, was unfolding its contents now that the conditions were met. The Supreme Tao Foundation, the system said, was ready to extract. I gave the consent. The price arrived first. My cultivation collapsed. True person to life gate. Life gate to spiritual sea. Spiritual sea to condensing consciousness. The drop kept going. The years I had spent reaching true person came undone in an order that took less time than my breath needed to finish. By the time the system stopped, I was at blood nourishing, the bottom of the body refinement ladder, where ordinary children of cultivation families started. And my body was a body that did not belong to me yet. The pause that followed was the longest pause of my second life. Then the foundation arrived. It came up through the soles of my feet and rebuilt me from the floor of my own existence. The blood went first, 8 realms in a single sustained motion, my apertures opening one by one and then opening again. My meridians reconfiguring as the spiritual energy density inside Fahai's Kasaya rose to a level I had only ever read about in cultivation classics. 10 rivers of chi were inside the canopy. I drank the better half of them. By the time my cultivation stabilized, I was at true person again, the same realm I had been at 30 seconds ago. The same realm. 10 times the strength. 360 apertures had opened simultaneously. Each one was running its own vortex now. My processing speed for one breath was 100 breaths of the man I had been the previous night. I had read this scene in 100 novels. I had imagined it before. I had never been the man on the inside of it. Far away, on Profound Peak, Ethan was attempting his next breakthrough. I knew this because I had timed it. The spiritual energy I had just drained from the regional vein network was the spiritual energy his breakthrough required. He had been 6 breaths from advancing. He was now 6 breaths from sitting on the floor of his cultivation chamber with a backlash injury he could not explain. breath rough, vision white. The room unmoved around him because the world had decided it had something else it wanted to do today. The system, in its smaller font, scrolled a brief observation. Target Ethan. Breakthrough attempt failed. Backlash registered. Cultivation Foundation incurred minor damage. The smile I felt was the smile of a man whose plan had begun to keep its own time. Fahai's voice came down through the Kasaya. Benefactor, you have overstepped. He was speaking to a man I had not yet seen. The phoenix cry inside the Kasaya had drawn an observer. I left Catherine to her awakening and walked out through the side wall the building no longer had, and I rose to the level Fahai was at, and I saw the second figure standing in the air on the other side of the Kasaya's edge. Except he was not a monk. He was an older man in plain dark robes, one hand at the sleeve of the other. The kind of stillness in his face that comes from being a Saint Realm cultivator whose stillness is not a posture. The system named him before he could speak. Marcus. Realm, late stage saint. Origin, Grand Elder of the Divine Martial sect. Affiliation, subordinate force of the Adrian clan. I had killed him in a previous life. It had taken me 3 hours of work and a lot of help from Ethan. He had been an old enemy of someone Ethan was courting, and Ethan had asked me, in the warm voice of a junior brother who needed a small favor from a senior brother who would not be missed if he later did not survive, to handle the matter quietly. I had handled it. I had been thanked. The Adrian clan had quietly closed the gate of their ancestral land that month and had not opened it again before I died. The man across from me did not know any of that yet. Fahai's killing intent had already gathered into the staff. Marcus's hand at his sleeve had shifted half a finger in a way that was not idle. 2 saints, one of them late stage and one of them early, were a hand twitch from a fight I did not want them to have. Marcus, my voice was clean across the air. Who gave you permission to lay a hand on my men? The line did the work I needed it to do. Marcus's head turned toward me. His eyes did the next half second of confused reevaluation that the eyes of a man do when they realize the boy in front of them has the family aura they had been trying to detect by approaching from the wrong direction. He folded his hands. He bowed. The bow was deeper than it needed to be. His voice carried a small, steady tremble at the edges. Young master, I did not expect. I have disturbed you. Please, punish me. I did not punish him. Fahai produced a noise. The noise was the kind of noise a man makes when the man he was about to fight has just bowed to the boy he was protecting, and the man he was about to fight has not yet apologized to him personally. You monk. Marcus's eyes moved sideways. Professional. If our young master had not been here, I could have killed you with one strike. Fahai raised his Zen staff. You can give it a try. Shut up. My voice did not rise. Both of you. They stopped. Both of them. Marcus turned back to me. He produced a piece of jade from his sleeve. He crushed it between his fingers, and a letter unfolded out of the broken pieces in clean lines of script. The 47th letter from my grandfather. Same opening, same closing. The same invitation to come home that had arrived every year for years. I let the Tao principles in the script settle into me where they wanted to settle. They nourished my new foundation a small amount on their way through. I let the rest of the letter sit in my hand. Tell my grandfather, I said. I will be home as soon as I have finished what I am doing here. Marcus froze. His mouth opened in the shape of his next sentence, and the sentence did not come. Marcus. I closed the letter back into its jade form. You're talking too much. Go, he went. When I came back inside, Catherine was on her feet. She had not been on her feet for a year. She was on them now, without the wall, without the bedpost, without anything to hold. The crimson light around her had retracted into her body the way a tide pulls itself back into the ocean, leaving its outline in the wet sand. The phoenix pattern remained between her shoulder blades, a faint glowing tracery beneath the silk of the robe Fahai had had the discretion to drape over her before he had risen to deal with Marcus. Her cultivation was at late stage true person. I checked the panel. Her fate had reset. Her affection toward host now read deep love. A new acquired attribute had populated under Heavenly Phoenix Nirvana, Heavenly Phoenix Rebirth, 4 stars. She had spent the day entering a new body, and her old life had let go of her the way old skin lets go of a snake. She crossed the room to me. She did not stagger. She crossed it the way a true person crosses a room. Then she lowered her head against my chest, and her voice came smaller than her cultivation suggested it should. My lord, you're mine now, I said. She lifted her face. The light in her eyes had something in it that did not belong to the cold poison or the bedroom or the morning I had taken from her. Something older, something the bloodline had given her with the awakening, a clarity that had not been there yesterday. I swear to the heavens, her voice was steady. I will be your wife in this life and in every life that follows. If I break this oath, may heaven and earth strike me down. The thunder broke in a clear sky. It was not a storm. It was a single clean clap of agreement. Heaven had registered the vow. Heaven had bound it. The system arrived in the same heartbeat. Target Catherine subdued. Heart oath registered. Fate reset to host's allocation. Stripping ancillary fate from target Ethan. 2,000 fate transferred to host's pool. Reward, 7,000 QI luck value. Physique enhancement scroll, 1 use. I had a thought. It was the cleanest thought of my second life so far. The system was offering, in smaller text under the reward, a kill option. Terminate the bound target, receive massive secondary rewards. The math was generous. A Saint Realm War Slave token, a first-level foundation augmentation, the kind of reward that would put me 3 years ahead of where I was now. I considered it. I considered it the way you consider any clean transaction. I closed it. The reason I closed it was not the only reason I told myself. The reason I told myself was that her ongoing luck attribute would feed me indefinitely if she remained alive. That was true. It was also not the only thing that was true. She felt my distraction. Her hand came up against my jaw the way it had come up the night before, except her body was a different body now, and the gesture had become a different gesture. What is it? Where did you go? I lied. I did it well. I had practiced. I was thinking of my mother and my father, I said. If they had lived, they would probably have approved of you. She did not check the lie. She put her arms around me and put her cheek against my shoulder, and she said, against the silk of my robe, that I would never be alone again. I let her say it. I let myself, for one breath, almost believe her. Then I closed the breath, and we walked out into the courtyard, and Fahai descended his Kasaya, and the day went on. I left Northbrook with the wind at my back, and a system panel that had not been this full in a previous lifetime. Catherine had walked me to the front gate. She had not asked when I would come back. She had stood at the threshold of her own house, restored to the cultivation she should have had if her bloodline had been allowed to wake when it was supposed to, and she had let me leave without saying anything. A woman who was now my woman and had been a stranger that morning. I lifted off the courtyard at a pace I had not been able to manage 2 days ago, and the cloud line opened underneath me like a thing letting me through. I had been in the air for the count of 100 breaths when the thought came up. The thought I had been refusing to name since I had stood up from her bed. She had touched the strand of her own hair without thinking, the way a wife touches her hair around her husband. I slapped myself once. The slap was not gentle. The crack of it across my own face was loud enough to be heard from the city below if anyone had been listening. The wind absorbed it. My cheek absorbed the rest. I let the heat sit on my skin for a few breaths, and then I did not think about her again until the floating mountains of the sect came into view. There were 3 of them. They had been 3 for as long as the sect had existed. Heavenmark Peak in the center, higher than the others. The residence of Sect Master Solomon. Profound Peak to the north, where my master lived and where my own quarters were. Skytop Peak to the south. The sect's protective formation hung over all 3 like an inverted bowl of immortal light, and the 3 peaks rotated in slow synchronized orbit around the center. I had grown up looking at this skyline. I had once thought of it as home. The previous lifetime had taught me that a place can be a home and a battlefield at the same time, and that not knowing the difference is a way of dying. I came down on Profound Peak. The Mystery Palace stood at the summit, black stone and silent. The Sword Tomb, where my master sat with the weapons of the supreme beings she had killed during the centuries before I had been born. The plaque above the door pulsed with a faint sword, intent that was older than my entire family. I crossed the threshold without knocking. She was waiting for me. The Mystery Palace was a sword tomb. Hundreds of weapons hung from the inner walls, each a relic of an enemy my master had cut down before the sect had decided to give her elder's status. I had been in this room 6 times in 20 years. I had touched none of the swords. The swords were not for touching. They were for remembering whose hands had held them last. She stood at the far end with her back to me. Diana in her own home was a different thing than Diana in a sect meeting. Her hair was not pinned. The sword across her back was not the ceremonial sword. The aura that filled the room when she turned to look at me was the aura she did not bother dressing up. She studied my face for the count of 3 breaths. Your heart is in turmoil. Her gaze settled on me. Why? I had a prepared answer. I gave her the prepared answer. I thought about some things I did not want to happen. She did not press. She crossed the floor to a low table, pulled a chair out for me with 1 finger of cultivation pressure, and waited until I sat. Tea materialized between us in a small cup that she did not pour. What brings you here today? I dropped the concealment I had worn for 2 years. I did not announce the reveal. I let her see it the way a man lets another cultivator see a treasure he had been carrying. by simply stopping the work of hiding it. The Supreme Tao Foundation was a thing visible to anyone at her level. Hidden, it had registered as a true person foundation of unusually clean make. Unhidden, it registered as the thing it actually was. Her eyes widened a quarter of a degree. Supreme Tao Foundation. Her voice held very still. You actually cultivated the Supreme Tao Foundation. I let the silence sit a moment. Through the endless ages, I said, no foundation in any heaven or any realm exceeds it. She was not impressed by the line. She was already past being impressed. She had moved into the part of her thinking where she was reorganizing everything she had assumed about me over the previous 2 decades. It seems I underestimated you. What do you want? The position of Dowchild, I said. She did not pause before her response. From the moment I accepted you as my disciple, the position of Dowchild should have been yours in my eyes. Whatever you need from me, you have it. I had expected the support. I had not expected it to arrive without conditions. If I kill Ethan, will you have any objection? She looked at me a long moment. The look was not surprise. The look was the careful re-examination of a woman who had accepted a disciple's recommendation about a second disciple and was only now realizing that the recommendation had been a mistake the recommender already knew about. You brought him here, she said. You can decide what to do with him. I took the cup. I drank what was in it. The tea was the kind of tea that does not waste itself on someone who is not paying attention. The saint behind you. She added it as if it were a small detail. He can serve as a guest elder at Profound Peak. It will give him an identity. He will be allowed to come and go without questions. Thank you. She did not say you're welcome. She did not require it. I rose to leave, and as my hand reached the door, her voice followed me, quieter, the half-amused tone she used for things she was choosing not to take seriously. You seem to have changed a great deal overnight. I paused with my hand on the door. Perhaps a person can grow up in a minute, I said. I did not look back. I did not need to. She had already returned to the part of the room where her swords were waiting. I sealed the palace. 18 array patterns activated along the inner walls in sequence. Defense, concealment, gathering, suppression. The small standards that my family had built into the structure itself when they had given me the dwelling on my 5th name day. The palace was an Adrian clan artifact. It was bigger on the inside than the outside. It was, when I closed it, invisible to almost anything not standing on the same peak. I opened the system panel. The interface had grown. Where there had once been a single target line, there were now 2, Ethan and Catherine. And the secondary inventory had begun to populate with the items the previous extractions had unlocked. Divine Elephant Suppressing Prison Force, ready to extract. Constitution Enhancement, ready to extract. Luck value at 11,000. Anomaly classification confirmed. I gave the system the first command. Extract the Divine Elephant Suppressing Prison Force. The voice that arrived next was older than the system's normal text. It introduced itself as the technique's lineage voice, a recorded teaching, the kind of thing you find threaded into ancient artifacts when their original owners want their methods to outlive them. The voice described a body of 840 million particles, each capable of being awakened to the strength of a giant elephant. The first awakened particle gave the strength of an ordinary elephant. The 30,000th would suspend a small mountain. The 840 millionth would not have the word strength applied to it anymore. The voice gave me an incantation. I recited it. The 360 apertures along my body opened, and they did not stop opening. The first absorption emptied the spiritual energy stored in my palace. The second drew from the air outside. The third reached through the floor of the palace into the mountain itself. Profound Peak, one of the 3 sacred peaks of the entire Heavenmark sect, with the formation overhead and 1,000 years of accumulated chi inside its bedrock, began to drain. I pulled. The immortal light around the peak dimmed visibly. The spirit plants in the gardens at the lower elevations began to wilt where they stood. The trees on the western slope shed leaves out of season. I knew, and the system confirmed, that down at the foot of the mountain, exactly where the lower tier disciples were given their cultivation chambers, Ethan was attempting his 3rd breakthrough of the week to the awakening realm. The spiritual energy he needed to push through was the spiritual energy I was inhaling from above. I did not stop. The first giant elephant particle awakened with a sound I felt rather than heard. The second came on the heels of it. The 3rd and 4th awakened together. By the time the count had reached the thousands, the awakening was a chain reaction. Each particle's ignition ignition feeding the next, and my body had become a thing that the room could no longer comfortably contain. 30,000 particles awakened. I stopped because that was where the first stage of the technique ended, not because I was tired. The pause was a procedural one. Above the palace, above the array patterns, an enormous translucent silhouette of an elephant condensed in the night sky over the sect, a divine elephant the height of a small range, and it raised its head and made a sound that traveled. Far away, beyond the borders of the sect, ferocious beasts of every spiritual rank inside the sound's reach went to their knees and stayed there. I felt the second divine shackle on my cultivation crack. When it broke, my realm advanced. King and Marquis stage, great power by classification. My arm, when I lifted it to look at it, carried the equivalent of 300 million jinn of force. At the foot of the mountain, Ethan's third breakthrough attempt had failed. He was on the floor of his cultivation chamber, coughing blood. The spiritual energy he had needed had not arrived. The room had been silent at the worst possible moment. He did not know why. He was about to find out that this was the third failure in a sequence that had not yet reached its end. I gave the system the second command, Constitution Enhancement. The body I had been wearing since I was born, 9 Heavens sacred body, top grade among physiques, the kind of body the Adrian clan had been hoping its only heir of this generation would manifest, opened along its lines of essence. The system did not just enhance it, the system rebuilt it. Strange light came down through the ceiling of my palace. The light landed on the floor where I sat, and it climbed me. It crossed my arms, my chest, my face. Ancient runes, none of which I had ever seen, and none of which the system bothered to translate, surfaced along my skin in the order of the body's primary meridians. I did not move. I did not need to. The light was doing the moving. A pillar of aura shot upward from the palace. It went through the array patterns I had set as if they were not there. It went through Fahai's residual concealment as if it were not there. It went through the sect's own protective canopy, and the canopy held, and the pillar continued past it into the sky. The stars came out. It was nighttime, but the stars do not normally come out the way they came out then. Bright enough to throw shadows on the courtyard outside the palace, in the order of the constellations of the endless Tao domain, with one large eye opening above all of them. The Eye of Punishment. I had read about it once in a scroll my grandfather had not realized I had borrowed. Cosmic phenomena that appeared at the birth of an unparalleled being. The eye contained destruction the way a held breath contains a scream. The endless Tao domain woke up. I did not see it, but I felt it. Across the realm, supreme beings I had never met were turning their attention toward the location of the phenomenon. Some of them were sect leaders. Some of them lived in places that had not had visitors in centuries. They were preparing to come, the way a man prepares to move toward a sound he has been told to investigate. A voice arrived first. It was not a voice meant for me. It came in across thousands of miles, ancient and even, and it announced what my grandfather had taught the realm to know about my family. The awakening physique below was the young master of the Adrian clan. Anyone disturbing it would be punished. There was a silence after that. Then another voice. Not from a forbidden zone, exactly, but from the kind of place that does not get described directly in family records, protested. The Adrian clan, the protest said, was too domineering in seizing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to awaken the body of one of its young. A celestial sword crossed the realm before the protest finished. A different voice, female, reached the protester through the same channel and informed him that another word would mean execution. A third voice, calmer, older, the voice of someone who lived next door to the protester and was tired of him, restrained him, and told him he could die alone, but he could not drag his entire region down with him. The protester stopped speaking. A new voice arrived. Gentler, Sect Master Solomon. He apologized for his junior sister's impulsive sword. He noted that the boy whose physique was awakening was not only the young master of the Adrian clan, but also his sect's disciple. He requested face. He said he would return the favor in the future. The forbidden zones backed down. The Eye of Punishment poured its primordial power into me. I was on my knees by the time it finished. My eyes had become a different shape than they had been when I sat down. Silver pupils, patterns of destructive script behind them. Punishment, heaven true eyes. I stood up. My realm had advanced again, 2 stages in one event. Early stage king and marquis was the formal label. The body itself no longer had the word body for it. I tested the eyes. I lifted my gaze to a small unnamed mountain on the western horizon. A peak about 10,000 feet high. The kind of mountain that gets a name from local farmers and not from the sect cartographers. I looked at it. The look was not violent. It was the look of a man checking whether his cup is empty. The mountain was no longer there. There was no dust. There was no debris. There was a flat expanse of land where a mountain had been, and the air over the flat expanse was clean. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the system updated its panel. Talent, punishment, heaven Dao body, cultivation, early stage king and Marquis realm, luck value, 11,000, targets, Ethan, Catherine. It looked correct. I came out of my palace at the first lightning of the eastern sky. The sect was awake. It had been awake all night. Lights were on in every wing that had a window, and disciples I had not spoken to in months were standing on the balconies of the inner buildings to look up at Profound Peak. Whatever they had heard or seen had not been ordinary. The peak was theirs to share with me. They would not be sharing it with me for much longer. A figure was already standing in the courtyard. He was older than the peak under his feet. White beard, plain robe. The aura around him was the aura of a man who did not need an aura. He was the kind of cultivator who had stopped having to demonstrate his rank approximately the same century the sect had begun keeping written records of him. Sect Master Solomon. He had a small smile arranged on his face. He did not bow. He had not bowed to anyone in 700 years. He inclined his head a fraction of a degree, which from him was the equivalent of a deep bow, and waited for me to speak first. Sect Master. I lowered my own head a degree more than his. I should have come to you earlier. You were rude, he said, but I have decided to forgive it. Sister Diana has explained. I had assumed she would. I had also assumed the forgiveness. The punishment heaven Dao body produced its own forgiveness. The sect could not afford to be ungenerous toward a disciple of this rank, and Solomon was a man who priced his decisions accurately. He gestured outward at the assembled balconies. In 3 months, he said, at the sect celebration, you will be crowned the sole Dowchild of the Heaven Mark sect. The rank includes Peak Master authority and a Heaven Mark Peak Palace. Your previous quarters here will remain yours if you wish to keep them. I do. He smiled wider. I thought you might. A pause. He folded his hands inside his sleeves. He looked briefly at a balcony 3 terraces down, a small balcony that had not held a person 2 seconds ago and held a person now. Ethan stood there. I had not seen him in days. He had not seen me. He looked like a man who had been failing to break through to the awakening realm 3 times in a row over the past week and was running out of explanations for why. His eyes had a quality his face had never produced when he was speaking to me, naked, unmodulated, a kind of cold, disbelieving rage that had not yet decided what to do with itself. His thoughts arrived through the system as a brief observation. Target Ethan. Affection toward host. Degraded from tool for use to declared enemy. The trade was acceptable. Solomon was still looking at me. His smile had not changed. The killing intent that had risen up my throat, clean, practiced, instinctive, after 3 days of having it organized, must have shown for half a second too long, because his eyes flicked sideways at it, and the killing intent stopped. The space between us had been frozen by his cultivation pressure for that half second. The pressure released as easily as it had arrived. Be more straightforward in showing strength, he said, gentle. You're underestimating the value of the Heaven Mark sect, and your own. I bowed my head. He continued, the smile holding. The Dao body. I cannot identify the specific type. Only the host can. That part of the matter is between you and the heavens. He paused, considering. Should you wish, we can move your residence to Heaven Mark Peak. The cultivation environment there is more refined. I bowed my head again. No need. I am quite content here on Profound Peak. Of course, he said, and his eyes did the small, amused thing they had done when I was 9 years old, and had asked him a question my grandfather had told me not to ask. Then, move into the 9 Profound Palace itself. Your master lives there alone. She has been quite lonely. He said it lightly. I caught the implication in the same beat. My face did not move. I was about to say something non-committal when the sky split. A sword came across the horizon in a single white line. It was not fired. It traveled. It had been somewhere very far and was now here, and the line of its travel cut through clouds, weather, and the sect's protective canopy, and ended in the air above Solomon's left shoulder. Solomon did not look at it. His face did not change. He took half a step back. His robe flickered and was gone, and a second after he was gone, the sword stopped where his shoulder had been, hovered, decided he was no longer there to be hit, and turned around and went home. A voice, his, hung in the air after him. The boy was on his own from here. I stood alone in the courtyard with the sword's wake fading, and the sky returning to its previous color, and Ethan no longer on his balcony. There were forces inside this sect I did not know yet. There were forces outside this sect I knew, but had not yet measured. Killing Ethan was a thing I could not do today, and possibly not tomorrow. The system, in its smaller font, scrolled an unrelated line. Recommend continued accumulation. The path is on schedule. I walked back into my palace. Diana crossed the courtyard in 5 strides and shoved a black token into my hand without looking at me. Old fool, she said, addressing the empty air where Solomon had been. I will cut him into 8 pieces sooner or later. The token was warm with her cultivation. The 9 mysterious decree, the master command for every formation on Profound Peak. She had given me her house key in the most unsentimental terms available to her. She did not wait for thanks. She rose into the sky with murderous calm and headed for Heavenmark Peak to find Solomon about whatever specific provocation he had committed before he had escaped the divine sword. I stood with the token a moment. A voice behind me, light and practiced, made the small wet sound of feigned admiration. Congratulations to Chief Adrian, the supreme physique, the Dowchild position, all in one fell swoop. Victoria had arrived at the foot of the staircase, as if she had not been waiting there for the better part of an hour for a reason to walk up it. Purple hair, fox-like eyes, a robe that had been chosen with more care than her cultivation had earned her. She moved closer to me as she spoke, the way a person moves closer when they are testing whether the room contains a door they can open with proximity. The system folded its panel into my vision before she finished her sentence. Victoria, realm, peak saint, breakthrough imminent, fate value, 1,999, just below the threshold the system uses to designate a person of full destiny. Innate fortune, top grade cauldron, 3.5 stars. Natural allure, 3 stars. Keen eye for talent, 2.5 stars. The cauldron line registered in the part of my mind that was always counting. A top grade cauldron could double the comprehension of anyone who held it. I had a cultivation that needed comprehension. Ethan's network had given Victoria to him quietly in the previous life. It would not be doing so this life. I let her come a step closer without responding. The trade had a shape. I knew the shape. I just was not going to take the bait inside it today. The 9 mysterious decree opened Ethan's protective array as if it were a curtain. I crossed the courtyard. The cultivation aura I let off was the aura of a Dowchild making a casual social call, bright, indifferent, pressing the air around me without intent. I felt the breakthrough barrier in his cultivation chamber a half second before I crossed the door, the way a man feels the surface tension of a pond a half second before he steps onto it. I stepped through it. The breakthrough collapsed. The barrier closed. The acupoint he had been opening reset to its prior locked state. The backlash hit him in the chest, and the chest produced a fine red line of blood at the corner of his mouth that he wiped with the back of his hand before I had finished crossing the floor toward him. He rose smoothly. His face arranged itself into the version of his face that was used for senior brothers. He thanked me for arriving in time. He had been worried, he said, about something or other. He had been hoping I would visit. Somewhere underneath the words, his teeth were a different shape than the words required. Junior brother. I let the line carry the small, surprised regret of a man who had not realized he had walked into someone's cultivation. It seems I arrived at the wrong moment. He produced a smile. He told me, in the careful voice of a junior brother who has had 4 breakthroughs ruined in a row, that he was used to it. The disturbances had helped him identify shortcomings, he said. He was grateful for the consolidation. I let the smile hold longer than was necessary. Your eloquence has improved. You are right. Your senior brother truly does not appreciate your work. I watched his hand close around itself, and the fingernails go through the skin of his palm, the way a man clenches a fist when he has decided to do something with the fist that he is not yet allowed to do. I told him I had come to thank him. His mother's cold poison, I noted, had been thoroughly addressed. I let the word thoroughly do a small amount of work it had not done before. He bowed his thanks again. The bow was perfect. It was also the bow of a man whose blood was now on the palm he was bowing with. I produced the pill from my sleeve. It was a tiger bone and leopard tendon pill, the kind of cultivation aid the Adrian family stocked the way other families stocked tea. The grade was high enough to make a junior disciple grateful for a year. The side effect was high enough to make the same disciple regret the year for the rest of his life. The pill strengthened the body. It also strengthened the unopened acupoints, which made the remaining acupoints harder to open later. It was only meant to be taken after all 360 had been opened. Ethan had 341 of them open. He did not know he had a deadline. I gave him the pill as an apology gift. He accepted it with the kind of gratitude that travels on its own muscles. He thanked me at length, called me generous, bowed 3 times. I asked casually what he had done to his hand. He laughed and said he had been so moved by the gift that he had scratched his own palm with his own fingernail. I looked at the gash, which was not the kind of gash a fingernail makes, and I said nothing, and he said nothing back. and the silence between us did the work of 2 further conversations. I noted, then, the second presence in the courtyard that had been there for the whole exchange. "Elder Victoria," I said, mildly, into the air outside the door. "If you intend to stay overnight in the disciples' quarters, Elder Grace will not be as easy to talk to as I am when she returns." Victoria emerged from the void at the corner of the room with the small, embarrassed laugh of a woman who had been certain her concealment was better than mine. She flattered me at length about my perception. She was, she said, only here to ask Ethan a question of no consequence. She would leave shortly. She was sorry to have intruded. I let her finish. I left the room without turning back. The 2 of them stayed in it. Behind me, in the chamber, a teacup hit the wall hard enough to be heard from the courtyard, and Ethan's voice, finally, briefly, in his real register, used the words 4 times, and 100-fold, and 1 day. Victoria's voice, calmer, told him his fortune was great, and Adrian was only a stumbling block. I stepped off the courtyard porch. I had given Ethan a weapon he had swallowed. He had given me an enemy who finally believed he was an enemy. Both of those things were investments. I sealed the palace. Fahai arrived from the void without the body parts of being summoned. He bowed his head a fraction and waited. "In 10 days, I said, Victoria will sense her breakthrough opportunity. There is a secluded valley in the desolate realm she will go to alone. I want her captured during the tribulation, not killed." He considered. He confirmed he could kill her with reasonable confidence. Capture, he said, was harder. Capture would require help, someone strong enough to seal her cultivation while he handled the artifacts. He suggested Marcus. He noted, with a small edge that had nothing in it of jealousy and everything of professional respect, that Marcus on his own was a man Fahai would not bet on himself against without his Wuwang Buddhist beads in hand. "Marcus, then," I said. I produced a sound transmission stone and pressed 3 days into it. "Come find me. Important matter." The stone drew the message away into the air. Fahai folded his hands and stepped back into the void. I sat with my pure heart palace shrunken to the size of my palm and considered, briefly, what Ethan was doing in his courtyard at this exact moment. The system answered automatically. He had asked Victoria to verify the pill. She had verified it. He had taken it. He had thought, while he took it, that his senior brother's gifts would become weapons against him. He had been right about the second half of the sentence. The rear hall of the Mystery Palace was a sword tomb. Hundreds of swords, each one with a small blood-stained inscription on the hilt, naming the original owner and the realm at which the owner had been when my master had taken the weapon out of their possession. Crimson Swordmaster, Wisdom Sword. Several names I did not recognize, most of them with the word Supreme appearing somewhere in the description. Diana was sitting on a low platform at the far wall. She did not turn around when I arrived. She did not need to. She knew what entered her hall and what did not. I crossed the floor and sat at the base of the platform. "Master is a celestial being, naturally not a human. Are you insulting me?" "Otherwise," I said, "why do you call yourself the Sword Immortal instead of the Sword Venerable?" She made a small sound that was not quite laughter. She added, almost to herself, that Supreme was worthless. I had asked the question I was about to ask in a previous life and had not received an answer because I had not been brave enough to wait for one. I asked it again. "Is there any possibility between us?" "Talk about it when you surpass me," she said. "Then I have already surpassed you." I lifted my eyes. "At least in this, my love for you exceeds yours for me." The blow was instant. She had not moved her body. The cultivation pressure in the air around me settled briefly across the back of my head with the efficiency of a hand. My forehead did the involuntary thing of touching the stone of the platform's base and stayed there for the count of 2. Flirting with one's master deserves a beating. Try it again and I will increase the dose. I lifted my head and put the question away. I rose. I bowed. "Come back soon," she said, without looking at me. 2 words. 2 words she had not said to me in 20 years. I held them in my chest the entire walk back across the courtyard, and they did not stop being 2 words. And the cultivation that had been at 30,000 particles when I had entered her hall began to add the next 1,000 on the way back to mine. I went to Northbrook the morning Victoria was set to depart with Emily. I kept my aura folded down to nothing and stood outside the back wall of the Ethan residence while Victoria conducted, in the inner garden on the other side of the wall, the polite social ritual of taking a maid into the sect at the request of the maid's young master. Catherine presented herself with the dignity of a woman who knew exactly what kind of woman she was speaking to and did not intend to provide additional satisfaction. Victoria was as gracious as a fox at a chicken coop. The pair of them said almost nothing of substance for the count of a quarter hour. Victoria left with Emily in tow. Catherine watched them through the gate. The moment the gate closed, she said, in her own voice, that the visiting elder was a vixen and that she she could see straight through the act. I came over the wall. She did not startle. Her cultivation was at a level where startle had become an option, and she had stopped exercising it. She kept her eyes on the gate. You came. You did not have to. Of course I did. I let my hand find hers. I missed Aunt Yun. She looked at me sideways. The look had a small piece of jealousy in it she had not been planning to show me. That woman, she said. Compared to me, who is more alluring? Victoria is not after Ethan, I said. She is after me. I value Ethan. That is why I am playing along. Do not concern yourself. The lie was a clean lie. She accepted it the way she accepted everything I said now. The cost of the lie was something I would count later and decide not to count. Far above us, on a balcony at Profound Peak, that I would not see for another half day, Emily was bowing in front of Ethan. The system fed me her thought. The thought was a comparison between the two men in her recent experience that placed Ethan well below me on every measurement her young mind could produce. Ethan accepted her into his service with an expression of brotherly delight. The trap in his courtyard, on his peak, was now closed in 2 layers. Westgate was one of the 36 major cities of Hallowed Realm. I had been here once before in a previous life, on Ethan's behalf, delivering a small king-grade gift to the city lord to lubricate a bureaucratic question that had benefited Ethan's 3-year duel arrangement with Sarah. The city lord had been grateful. Ethan had been grateful. I had been the one carrying the gift. I came in this time without the gift. The 9 mysterious decree opened the city's outer formation in the same way it opened any sect array. The protective formation around major cities was not for offense. It stopped people from arriving uninvited, and the decree was an invitation in palmstone form. I crossed the wall at the height of an evening kite. No one looked up. No one had been told to look up. The Lion family compound was on the south edge of the inner city, a modest holding by holy state standards, a few connected courtyards, a back garden, a residential wing for the 80-some members of the immediate clan, and a much smaller administrative wing for the head of household, who had not been the head of household for several years for reasons no one had yet been willing to put on paper. I came down on the back wall and stood listening for a moment. A blade was being practiced in the inner garden. The footwork was good. The breath was steady. The focus pulled the air around the practitioner into a particular shape I had only seen a few times before, in cultivators who would eventually reach the comprehension level called sword intent. The intent was not yet condensed. It was close. The owner of the breath was close enough that the wall I was standing on registered it. I dropped into the garden. She turned faster than I had given her credit for. The blade came around in a clean horizontal line at the level of my throat, an opening cut that her body had run 1,000 times. The blade hit me below the chin and broke. The pieces of the blade fell at her feet. The handle stayed in her hand. Her eyes did the math. "You must be Sarah," I said. She came up 2 steps and back 4. The handle of her broken sword did not lower. Her voice came thin. "Who are you? Why are you in my lion family?" I produced the array plate from my sleeve. It was a divine-grade trapping array, one of the items the Adrian clan stocked for assassinations they did not want investigated. I dropped it on the stones of the path between us. The plate sank. The formation it carried unfolded outward through the ground and reached the back wall, the front wall, the side walls, the south side of the south wing, and the closed gate of the eastern entrance. And the whole compound went silent in a way it had not been silent 5 seconds ago. The compound was sealed. Sarah's face did not yet understand what had happened. Her body did. The handle of her sword shook in her hand, very slightly. A 9th grade spiritual artifact. I lifted one of the broken pieces and weighed it in my palm. A pity. Even a king-grade weapon would not have left a mark. The footsteps came in from 3 directions. 5 kings of the Lion family, 7 great powers, 12 elders in total, arriving at the speed of cultivators who had felt the trapping array close around their compound and had decided that whatever was inside the array was now their problem. They surrounded me on the cobblestones in a loose ring. The first king to find his voice did the formal thing of demanding my identity and the family I belonged to. "You are not worthy to know." He did not take that well. He came at me with a palm strike. The palm strike was good. It was the kind of palm strike that, against a normal King Realm cultivator, would have ended a normal exchange. It hit my shoulder, and the runes that had been forming inside it scattered, and the king's arm went numb from the wrist up. He He stopped looking arrogant immediately. The other 4 kings, reading the encounter as evidence rather than warning, came in together. I clenched my fist. The divine elephant suppressing prison force gathered into the closing of my hand the way a flood gathers into a narrow throat. 35,000 particles tightened. The fist arrived at the air between us before the air had time to react to its arrival. The 4 kings did not survive the punch. I will not describe the way they did not survive. The courtyard between me and them rearranged itself. The 7 great powers in the outer ring tried to step backward through the trapping array and discovered that the trapping array did not allow that. They held still. I lowered the fist. Sarah was on the ground at the edge of the courtyard. She had not run. She had tried, and she had remembered the wall around the compound, and she had stopped trying. I crossed to her. Release your consciousness. My finger lifted to the air halfway between her brow and mine. Submit to me as your master, or die. She made a sound that was not a word. She did not have time to make a second one. A pillar of cultivation pressure erupted from beneath the courtyard. The cobblestones cracked. The east wing tilted 6 inches and stopped. The pressure climbed past Saint, past Peak Saint, past the threshold the divine treasury system marked as the boundary into the god realm, and kept climbing for 1 heartbeat longer. Sarah's mouth made the word it had been holding for the previous minute. Mother. The aura resolved into a woman. She was the matriarch of the Lion family, Eleanor. Fahai's intelligence had reported her as a true god at initial stage, dignified, retired from active cultivation since her husband had vanished in the outer battlefields 5 years ago. The intelligence had been accurate at the time it had been collected. It had not been accurate this evening. The breakthrough I had walked into the middle of had not been her natural one. It had been triggered by the shape of her courtyard from above, and the daughter on her knees in the middle of it. She rose through the cracked stones in a flowing red robe that had not been intended for combat, and was now the only thing she was wearing into the combat she was about to commit. Her eyes located her daughter first, located me second, did not look at the 4 ruined men in between. A divine sword condensed in her right hand from the air around her. You scoundrel, she said, in a voice an octave below her natural one. How dare you humiliate my daughter? The sword came across the air with sword energy in it. The energy was the kind of attack a fresh god king uses by reflex. Proper width, proper depth, proper line. It was meant to disassemble the man it hit. I caught it on a single fist. The energy cracked across my body and dispersed without entering my body. But the cost of catching it was that I was driven backward by a quarter of a step. My fist took a hairline cut from the edge of her cultivation, the first injury since the rebirth. I noted it. She had not expected the catch. She held her position at the center of the courtyard with the sword still extended and stared at me as if she were performing an algebra problem out loud. Her mouth opened and produced what was supposed to be a question. What is your cultivation? King Realm. I let my arm settle back to my side. Initial stage. She produced a sound that was not a word. It contained the recognition that the math she had been doing in her head had been the wrong math. I stepped forward. I had been holding back since the rebirth. I had been concealing my realm, pacing my technique, restraining the punishment Heaven Dao body's full output. The fight against Eleanor was the first one in either lifetime that was going to be permitted to use everything. I gathered. The fist that came up next was not the fist that had killed the 4 kings. The 4 kings had been a swat. This was a hand that meant to land. She brought the divine sword up to meet it. She bit her own thumb open. She painted the sword red. The blood on the steel made the cut wider, the line of it longer, the intent inside it sharper. She declared, in a voice that had recovered from her previous question, that she would fight me to the death. I was looking forward to it. The fight took the time of 1 cup of tea. She was a fresh god king. Her realm was not stable. Her technique was correct. Her divine sword was a precious artifact. Her bloodline-fueled blade was something that, 6 months from now, after she had stabilized her foundation, would have been a serious problem for me. Tonight, her foundation had less than an hour of seasoning on it. I had a punishment Heaven Dao body and a supreme foundation, and 3 days of practice with a body that produced 350 million jin of force out of an unclenched fist. I won. I did not kill her. I had not intended to kill her since I had walked into the city. The technique I used at the end was a containment punch, the kind a senior brother uses on a junior who has gotten too excited in sparring. It pushed her divine sword down through the cobblestones and back into the cracks of the courtyard her breakthrough had just produced. She did not lose consciousness. She lost the ability to stand on her own legs while her cultivation restabilized. I let her sit. The remaining Lion family members, the 7 great powers, the kings still alive, the 80-some-odd inner clan members who had been alerted and were now standing along the inner ring of buildings around the courtyard, held themselves in the position of people whose entire household had just learned the actual weight class of the visitor at the front gate. I lowered my voice to the volume I used in sect meetings. Adrian, of the Adrian clan, newly appointed Dowchild of the Heavenmark sect. A noise moved through the inner ring. One of the surviving kings, the one whose palm strike had only succeeded in numbing his own arm, exhaled a recognition of the sect's name in the voice of a man who had just learned that the death of his colleagues had been organizationally inevitable. He asked very quietly whether the Lion family would have surrendered earlier if I had introduced myself first. I did not answer him. Eleanor lifted her head from her seated position. "You came," she said, "to exterminate our clan or to deliver a gift?" Sarah, on the other side of the courtyard, made a smaller question through cracked teeth. She asked if I was here for Ethan's sake, if the destruction was a favor I was performing for someone whose name she had spoken with hatred for the better part of a year. "I have not said that," I said, "about Ethan or about anyone else." I let the line sit. I gestured outward at the courtyard. "I am offering 2 choices. The first, every person in this courtyard, including the matriarch, including the daughter, including every member of this household down to the kitchen staff, accepts a myriad transformations slave seal. The seal binds your loyalty to me. In exchange, the Lion family rises with my rise. The second, none of you accept the seal, in which case none of you walk out of this courtyard." The 80-something members of the inner Lion family did the math out loud, collectively, simultaneously, in the wordless way crowds make decisions. Most of them dropped to their knees in the same second. The kings dropped a fraction later. A handful of the proudest stragglers held themselves upright for the count of 3 before joining the rest. The matriarch and the daughter did not kneel. Eleanor lifted her chin from her chest. "If I take the seal," her voice was quiet, level, professional, "I want control of the Lion family. As matriarch, in fact, not in title only. Granted." She bowed her head once and let me put the seal in her sea of consciousness. The seal entered without resistance. The cultivation pressure that had broken stones around her dimmed the way a dimmed lamp dims, without losing the light, only losing the visible burn. The 7 great powers and the king followed her, in order of seniority, the 70-some inner clan after them. By the time the courtyard had emptied of holdouts, 82 of the 83 remaining members of the Lion family carried a myriad transformations slave seal in the deepest layer of their consciousness. The 83rd was Sarah. She had crossed the courtyard while I was working through her family. Her broken sword was still in her hand. The cuts on her hands were the cuts of a young girl whose body had not yet learned which expressions cost it which injuries. She faced me at 6 steps distance, and she said, in a voice I respected without saying so, that she would rather die than be Ethan's dog. I had been planning to address this. When did I say I had any relationship with Ethan? Her mouth opened, closed. The accusation she had been carrying around her chest for a quarter hour did not fit the line I had just given her. "Then prove it," I crossed to her. I did not address her family. I addressed her, which was the work of the moment. I told her, in language I would later not fully remember producing, that Ethan had killed me in a previous life, that he had used my talents like a man uses a tool and disposed of the tool when its usefulness expired, that in the previous life, her own future had been a thing he had also disposed of, that she had been imprisoned, broken, and then slowly killed across a span of years that would have made any man who watched it wish he had drowned the protagonist when he had been a child, that the favor I was doing her by enslaving her family this evening was the favor of a man who had been the protagonist's tool and had decided to help the people the protagonist would otherwise also use. She listened. The shape of her face did not change exactly. The position of her eyes inside it did. By the time I had finished, the broken sword had lowered to her side, and the resentment that had been the shape of her stance for the previous half hour had been replaced by something that was not yet trust, but had stopped being defiance. She lowered her head. The seal entered. The 83rd was placed. I produced the Extreme Wind Sword Manual from my storage, a Adrian clan heirloom I had no use for, since my sword comprehension was not the comprehension of a person who could read a manual at this level, and gave it to her, along with 30 pills, tiger bone and leopard tendon for the body, precious medicines for the meridians, spirit sea opening pills for the comprehension. I gave her the condition. You will defeat Ethan in your 3-year agreement. With these resources, in the time you have, you will. If you do, I will reconsider what the Lion family is worth to me. If you do not, I will treat you as I treated the 4 kings. She did not flinch. She thanked me with the small, clean bow of a cultivator who knew what she had been given and did not pretend she had earned it any other way. I walked out of the courtyard. Eleanor followed me at a respectful distance, in the manner of a matriarch following her new lord into the family's main hall to discuss the management arrangement. I let her walk behind me. I did not turn to look at her. I had counted the mole at the corner of her mouth on the way down to the courtyard from the wall, and I did not need to count it again. I left Westgate with 83 slave seals behind me and a sword manual, 1 fewer in my storage. The sky over the city had gone the color of the lanterns. Below me, in the inner streets, the residents of Westgate were going about their evening with no sense that the largest power shift in the city's recent history had occurred in the previous half hour. The trapping formation had withdrawn. The Lion family compound looked from above exactly the same as it had at noon. It was not the same. I rose through the cloud line. A system update scrolled into my vision as I headed back toward the sect. Target Ethan. Cultivation level dropped from peak meridian opening to early stage. Cause: tiger bone and leopard tendon pill side effect. Acupoint hardening manifesting. 3-year agreement countdown. 31 days remaining. The pill had begun to do its work. Below me, 1,000 miles away, on Profound Peak, Ethan was sitting in his cultivation chamber with his cultivation level a stage lower than he had spent the previous 3 months pushing it toward. He did not yet understand the cause. He did not yet understand the source. He would not understand the source for several months yet. By then, his cultivation would not matter. The communication stone in my sleeve hummed before I had crossed the 3rd province. Emily's voice came through small and careful. The report of an intelligence asset who had been waiting until her young master left the room to send it. Ethan, she said, had spent the previous evening alone in his chamber. Halfway through his meditation, a light had come out of his chest. The light had originated from a jade pendant he wore against his sternum and rarely showed to anyone. He had spoken to the air for the better part of an hour. The air had spoken back. She did not know what the air had said. She apologized for not knowing. I told her she had done well, and I closed the stone, and I stopped flying for a moment. I opened Ethan's panel. Chief Fate, 7,999. The number had been 4,999 the last time I had checked. 3,000 had returned to him while my back was turned. Underneath the existing fortunes, a new line had populated. Jade Noble, 4.5 stars. The jade was an ancestor, a remnant soul. Ethan's old grandfather, hidden in the pendant since his birth, had awakened ahead of schedule because of the crisis I had been creating around the boy he had been waiting to mentor. The previous lifetime's timeline had not seen this awakening for another 3 years. The previous lifetime had not, however, included a senior brother dismantling Ethan's luck across 3 months, while the boy's mother slept under the senior brother's roof. The butterfly effect had begun. I sat in the air for the count of 30 breaths and let the math settle. I was going to lose foreknowledge. Not all of it, not at once, but more of it, and faster, the more I changed. The advantage that had been my single largest asset was running on a clock I could not stop. I checked Victoria's panel. Realm. Peak Saint. Breakthrough guaranteed within 3 days. 3 days, not 9. The accelerating timeline had reached her too. I changed direction in the air without finishing the breath I had been taking. The sect was no longer my next stop. The secluded valley of Hollow Valley was the small dead pocket on the southern edge of hallowed continent that Victoria had picked 20 years ago in a previous life as the location of her supreme breakthrough. The valley was already her chosen place. The chosen place was where I would meet her. I opened the communication stone again and sent Marcus the new coordinates. Come fast. He came. The valley ate light. It had been carved by something larger than a mountain into the southern range of the continent. A long oblong of dark stone, narrow at the entrance and wide at the floor, with a mineral content in the rock that absorbed both sunlight and cultivation, glow without returning either. I had been told once that even Saint Lavelle Divine Sense did not penetrate further than 30 paces inside it. I had not, in either lifetime, had a chance to verify it personally. I dropped to the floor and walked the perimeter. Marcus arrived from the void at the back wall before I had finished the first lap. His robe had changed since I had last seen him outside the Ethan residence. The aura around him was a stage and a half higher than the aura he had carried when he had stood in the field outside that family's gate. Young master, he folded forward at the waist. The Patriarch sent rewards. Supreme Saint. Good, we are taking a saint alive. You will be sealing her. Marcus's expression took half a heartbeat to absorb the word saint. To took a full second to absorb the words alive. His mouth opened to ask which saint. He stopped before he asked. He had decided in the silence that asking which saint would not improve his information. Fahai stepped out of the rock at the side wall. The sky-piercing Zen staff was already in his hand. He took one look at Marcus, did the calculation of who had arrived first and who was therefore more important, and produced a sound that was not a word. "You were," Fahai said, "almost late." Marcus shrugged one shoulder. "I broke through to Supreme Saint on the way here. Forgive me for taking the time. You broke through to Supreme Saint, and you are still asking the young master if you have the courage to fight a peak saint," Fahai said. "A peak saint." Marcus's eyes did not leave Fahai. "Of Heavenmark sect." The staff lifted half a foot in Fahai's hand. I let them have 10 seconds of it. The argument was a release valve. They had been holding their respective tensions about each other since the first encounter at the Ethan residence, and they would not be useful in the operation if the tensions were not aired. At the 10-second mark, I reminded them that we were here to capture someone alive. The staff went down. The aura went down. Both of them folded their hands and did not look at each other. The void at the entrance of the valley folded open, and Victoria walked out of it. She was not yet in her breakthrough state. She had come ahead of schedule because the system had started to push her toward the place her body had marked for the event, and the place was here. She had chosen this valley exactly because no one used it. She was alone, dressed thinly, as casual as she had ever been at the sect. The seductive deflection she always wore in front of men hanging easily from her shoulders. Her eyes found me first, then touched Marcus briefly and dismissed him. "What a coincidence! Dowchild Adrian and Elder Marcus. What brings you here?" "Saint matters," I said. "Privacy. I am sure Elder Victoria understands." "I do." She tilted her head, the gesture of a woman who had already chosen her next sentence. "I was about to ask you to leave for the same reason. Mine first, perhaps?" We stood looking at each other. She took 2 steps closer. That was when Fahai moved. Fahai's staff was at her waist before her 2 steps had finished landing. The sky-piercing Zen staff struck behind the rib, in the channel between the floating ribs and the pelvis, where a saint's life essence sat in its most concentrated form. It did not break her, it interrupted her, the way a hammer interrupts a glass that has not yet finished falling. The cultivation she would have used to teleport away gathered at the back of her throat and stayed there. Marcus moved at the same instant. His Supreme Saint cultivation closed the space around her in 3 layers. First the air directly around her body, then the 10 paces around that, then the entire valley. Teleportation became impossible. The Divine Martial Sect's #1 seal, the technique he had been holding back for years out of habit and opportunity, sank into her dantian and locked it. Victoria folded onto the stone of the valley floor. Her cultivation, the cultivation that had been the ceiling of her advancement for 3 full years, collapsed inward and stayed collapsed. The peak saint that had been about to step over the threshold to Supreme was now a peak saint pinned under a divine seal that would not release without a great sage to break it. Fahai's kasaya unfolded across the ground beneath her. The robe locked her body to the surface of the valley. She could not sink into stone. She could not rise. She could not, when she tried, and she did try, even shift her weight against the kasaya's grip. She lifted her face up off the cloth. Her makeup had not survived the strike. The seductive deflection that had carried her into the valley had been replaced by something rawer, the face of a woman whose cultivation had been removed from her body in less time than the body had needed to register the removal. She looked at me. She did not say anything. I stood at the edge of the kasaya and let her look. I had no rush. The seal was the most secure seal in the affiliated forces of the Adrian clan. The valley absorbed sound and light. The 2 saints at my back were bored already. "Hello, Victoria," I said. "You have been hiding your superior cauldron very well." The line landed harder than the staff had. Her face did the small involuntary thing of confirming, in a fraction of a second, the secret she had been protecting since the year her bloodline had identified itself to her. The system, in its smaller font, registered the confirmation. Top-grade cauldron physique acknowledged. Subduing recommendation upgraded. I bent down. I lifted her by her purple hair. I did not lift her cleanly. The grip was the grip of a man dragging a thing across cobblestones, not the grip of a man assisting a fallen elder. I did not assist her. I dragged her into the entrance of Pure Heart Palace, which I had unfolded from my storage onto the valley floor, while she had been held under Fahai's kasaya, and the door of the palace closed behind us. I dropped her on the floor of the inner chamber. The 18 array patterns of Pure Heart Palace activated in their order. The defensive layer first, the concealment layer second, the suppressive layer third. By the time the 3rd array clicked into place around the room had become a place that no signal could leave. Nothing inside it would reach a Saint Elder of the sect, a great sage of the surrounding states, or the heaven that watched over both. I produced a small jar of spiritual water from my storage and let one drop fall onto her cheek. She came back into her body in stages. The eyelids first, then the breathing, then the pieces of memory rearranging themselves into a comprehensive narrative. By the time the narrative had finished, she had pushed herself to a half-seated position against the wall, and she was looking at me with the cleared eyes of a woman who knew she had lost the previous engagement and was trying to identify what she had been trapped inside. The question came small and even. The question of a woman performing competence in front of the man who had just removed her cultivation. Did Ethan tell you? I did not answer it. I let the silence sit. I let her hear her own question echo against the 18 layers of the palace's interior. By the time her face had begun to do the math she was about to do, I had set my expression to something kinder than I felt, and I had crouched on my heels at the level of her eyes. Yes, the word did the work I needed it to do. She was the kind of cultivator who knew better than to believe a single word from someone in my position. And she was also the kind of woman who had spent years watching Ethan do the things he had been doing to keep his junior brother loyal. The lie I was about to tell her did not require her to trust me. It required her to remember Ethan. I told her, in language I made soundboard, that Ethan had given me 3 precious herbs in exchange for the location of her breakthrough valley. He had told me, I said, that her body was a top-grade cauldron, and that if I had any interest in such matters, the cauldron would not be wasted on me. He had even, I added, requested that I leave her remains intact afterward, for himself, after his cultivation had recovered enough to enjoy them. I delivered the lie at the speed of a man reading a list. I watched the lie land. It did not land all at once. It landed in pieces. The first piece, that Ethan had sold the location, was small and easy. She had already half suspected it. The second piece, that Ethan had named her cauldron physique, knowingly to a stranger, was larger because it required her to face the fact that he had known. The third piece, that he had asked for her body afterward, was the piece that broke her. She was a woman who had given Ethan the kind of unconditional support a woman of her station only gives once in her life. She had told herself it was an alliance. She had told herself it was an investment. She had told herself it would, in the long run, produce a man who valued her at the level she had valued him. The lie made her face the version of him that did not. She made a sound that was not a word. She made it for some time. "Why?" she said, when she had stopped. "I treated him like a younger brother. Why would he treat me like this?" I did not answer her. I had no answer that would be of use to her. I produced the willow branch. It was the length of a man's forearm and an inch thick at the base. Pale wood, unstained, the leaves on it as fresh as they had been on the day the branch had been refined out of the spiritual root from which it had been grown. The branch was a tool the Adrian clan had developed for interrogation. It did not break the skin. It did not leave bruises. The pain it produced did not pass through the body at all. The pain it produced passed through the channels of the spirit. I will not describe the use of it in detail. The work that came next was not work I performed for an audience inside the room, and I am not going to perform it for an audience outside the room either. What I will say is that the willow branch is what it is. The cultivator on the floor in front of me was a Saint Realm cultivator with a sealed dantian and a body designed to absorb damage, and she did not have the apparatus to resist what the branch was doing to the parts of her that had nothing to do with her body. She begged early, she begged often. By the time the branch had stopped, she was a woman who had stopped having a sense of how much time had passed in the room since I had produced it. She crawled to me on the marble. She wrapped her hands around the lower hem of my robe. She did the small, wretched series of apologies that are not apologies, but a repeated naming of the master in front of her, an attempt to confirm by repetition that the relationship in the room had reorganized itself in his favor, and that she had accepted the reorganization. The seal she had been resisting at the start of the room was a seal she was now formally requesting. I lifted her chin off the hem of my robe. "Open your sea of consciousness." She opened it. The myriad transformations slave seal entered her without resistance. The system performed the registration, and the registration produced the small chime it always produced when the loyalty of a target was rewritten at the foundation level. A new line scrolled through my vision. Target Ethan, 1000 fate transferred to host. Reward, Thunder Emperor's treasure technique. Reward, 2,999 luck points awarded. Bonus, none. The Thunder Emperor was a name. I knew the name. He had been one of the 10 fiends of an older world a previous lifetime had given me knowledge of, the youngest of the 10, the most promising, ambushed and killed in the arc he had been about to win. His treasure inheritance lost across the dimensions until the system had decided it belonged to me. The technique that arrived in my mind weighed more than the cultivation I had built across 2 lifetimes. I closed the panel. I gave Victoria a healing pill from my storage. She caught it in trembling hands and swallowed it. The pill restored the surface of her body to where it had been at the start of the room. The interior of her did not, and would not for some time, return. She thanked me 3 times. The 3 times had the shape of 3 different prayers. I extended my hand to her. She took it. Far away, on Profound Peak, in his cultivation chamber, attempting under the Jade Noble's instruction to forge his true dragon body, Ethan spat foul blood and roared at the empty room about who had taken his things. The Jade Noble, examining him, would not be able to find anything wrong with him. The Jade Noble was a remnant soul, and a remnant soul could not see a system that operated by the structural decision of its designers on a level above destiny. The fight in the valley had taken less than the time of a single watch. The night was not yet over. I led Victoria deeper into the palace. I came out of the palace at dawn. Marcus was waiting at the entrance with a bow that had been waiting longer than the bow itself was old. Fahai was standing 1 pace behind him with the Zen staff at parade rest. Both of them had spent the previous night not asking each other questions about what had been happening inside the palace, and both of them had decided, with the kind of professional restraint their position required, that the appropriate way to greet the master in the morning was the appropriate way they had greeted each other for the last 3 days. I let the bow hold a moment, then I produced 2 boxes from my storage. I gave Marcus the first one. It was a holy great whisk, the sort of artifact a supreme saint had only marginal access to, and one that a grand elder of the divine martial sect in his entire previous lifetime had never received. He opened the box. He looked at the whisk for the length of 1 full breath. He bowed 3 times in increasing depth. "You can stop now," I said, before the 3rd one finished. He stopped. I gave Fahai the 2nd box. It was a dragon transformation sacred lotus, the kind of medicinal herb a Buddhist of Fahai's original lineage would have prayed for over 3 lifetimes and never seen. The dragon tattoo on his right shoulder reacted to the lotus before he had finished opening the box. The arm flexed once. The face above the arm did not. "Thank you, master." Fahai bowed once and put the lotus away. "My great, mighty heavenly dragon will not waste the gift." The door of the palace opened behind us. Victoria walked out in the white robe I had specified at the end of the night. The sheer purple gauze she had arrived in was no longer in the palace. The white covered her from the throat to the wrists to the hem. Her hair had been gathered. Her makeup was the makeup of a woman who had learned in the previous evening that the cost of certain choices was higher than the cost of others. She knelt at the threshold. The trembling in her voice was not performed. "Master, behave from now on." She bowed her head deeper. I told Victoria what was about to happen to her in language brief enough to be functional. I told her the seal that Marcus had placed in her dantian was about to come out. I told her the breakthrough she had been 3 days from achieving was going to attempt itself the moment the seal was gone. I told her that she would not be the one breaking through. The body that was standing in the valley was not going to be the body that absorbed the 18 lightning rounds the heavens were preparing for it. I would. She did not ask why. She did not have a vocabulary for asking why. She did the small obedient nod of a woman whose loyalty had been rewritten at the foundation level and was no longer running on the questions she had been raised on. I turned to Marcus. "Break the seal." Marcus opened his mouth to begin a sentence about the wisdom of trusting beautiful women and the historical record of cultivators who had not done so. I let him get 3 words in. "I will not say it again." He closed the sentence and broke the seal. The cultivation Victoria had been holding back at the wall of her dantian for 3 days surged. The breakthrough wave that should have arrived 3 days ago arrived now, late and enormous. And the sky above the valley darkened in the specific way the sky darkens when the heavens have noticed an event they intend to address. The clouds gathered into a low ceiling. The pressure in the valley dropped. Victoria felt it first. I watched her face do the brief, involuntary thing of a saint cultivator about to be hit by a supreme tribulation that she had been preparing to receive for years and was now receiving with most of her preparation gone to me. Her cultivation was not in its previous condition. Her foundation was thinner. The lightning that was about to descend was not going to be quite the lightning she had been counting on. The first bolt came down. It hit her shoulder and ran down her body, and she did not die because the first bolt of an 18-round supreme tribulation was the bolt the heavens sent as a wake-up call rather than an end. She absorbed it. She stood up. Her cultivation level adjusted upward by a fraction of a stage. The second bolt was building. I felt the silver vertical line between my brows respond before I had thought about responding. The punishment heaven Dao body, the body type the system had built for me back at the sect, the body that was specifically constituted to digest heavenly tribulation lightning, pulled toward the second bolt the way an empty stomach pulls toward food. I let it pull. Fahai, I said. Throw me into it. Fahai did not ask. He stepped forward, the Zen staff in his right hand, and his left hand caught the back of my robe and the air around me, and the force of his throw sent me up out of the valley floor in a clean arc that arrived at the descending second bolt at the exact moment the bolt had finished aiming. The bolt hit me. The second bolt entered me through the silver vertical line between my brows. The line was the marker the system had given me when the punishment heaven Dao body finished installing itself at the sect. I had not been entirely sure what the line was for. The line was for this, for the moment when a tribulation bolt larger than any I had previously absorbed needed somewhere to go inside me, and the line opened and the bolt went down it. The bolt fed the body it had been intended to destroy. The divine elephant suppressing prison force inside me responded the way a hungry man responds to a meal he has been rationing himself away from. The 35,000 giant elephant particles I had finished cultivating before the lion family operation began to multiply. By the time the second bolt had finished discharging itself into me, my particle count had crossed the line into the 60,000 range. The strength of 3 additional dragons added itself to the strength I had been carrying. I laughed. I had not heard the laugh in either lifetime. It came out of my chest, and it filled the inside of the cloud. The Thunder Emperor's treasure technique, the inheritance the system had awarded me at the end of the Victoria operation, woke up under the second bolt's residue and began to teach me the technique it had been holding in reserve. The voice that came with the technique was not my voice and was not the system's voice. It was older than both. It said one thing, and then it stopped saying anything. Punish the heavens. I understood what it meant. The third bolt came down. It transformed in its descent into a thunder god sword, a humanoid weapon shape that the heavens occasionally grew when they encountered a target that had refused to die properly. I caught the sword in my right hand. The sword recognized the hand it was in. The sword folded itself into me the way a key folds into a lock. The fourth bolt came. I absorbed it. The fifth bolt came. I absorbed it. The sixth, seventh, eighth bolts came in the rhythm of a tribulation that had begun to suspect it had been miscalibrated for the target it was hitting, and each of them found the silver vertical line between my brows already open for them, and each of them fed. By the eighth bolt, I had stopped counting. The punishment heaven Dao body was no longer the body I had been wearing at the start of the morning. It was a body the dimensions of which I had not measured, with electric arcs running between my fingers when my fingers moved, and the vertical line had begun to braid silver and purple along its length. The ninth bolt arrived. The ninth bolt was a 10-foot thick lightning python whose width was larger than the diameter of the valley floor. The python was a tribulation construct that, in any previous lifetime, would have been comparable to the final tribulation a supreme saint received. It was the heaven's first serious attempt to hit me. I came out of the enlightenment that had been holding me through the previous 5 bolts. I lifted my hand. Come. The python was pulled by a force I had not commanded my hand to deploy, and that had deployed itself anyway, into the silver vertical line. The body of the python compressed. The size of it shrank from a span that crossed the valley to a span that fit in my palm. It went inside me docile. The lightning that had been intended to kill me was now a small captive lightning source folded inside my forehead. The 10th bolt came. The 10th bolt did not transform into anything. It came down already obedient. It went into me the way a horse comes into a stable that the horse already knows. The 11th through the 17th bolts came in identical fashion. The thunderclouds above the valley began to roll in a way I had not seen any thunderclouds roll. The heavens were running out of standard responses. The heavens were preparing to send something that was not standard. I let the 17th bolt finish entering me, and I waited. The 18th bolt did not come down as a bolt. It came down as a dragon, 100 feet long, purple, body of compressed lightning, head of forged thunder, eyes of the part of the heavens that had decided it was tired of watching its punishment be eaten by the man it had been trying to eat. The heavenly punishment thunder dragon was not part of the standard 18-round tribulation catalog. It was a separate thing the heavens had been holding in reserve for the rare occasions on which a tribulation needed to escalate beyond its specified limits. It saw me. I saw it. It came down at a speed the punishment heaven Dao body, 3 months after after its activation was still not entirely calibrated for. The robe I had been wearing at the start of the morning ceased to be a robe between one heartbeat and the next. The silk that the Adrian clan had stocked my storage with had been chosen for use against Saint Level attacks. The dragon was not a Saint Level attack. The robe burned to ash in less than the time it took my body to register the temperature change. The skin under the robe held. The vertical line between my brows opened to its widest point of the morning. The dragon entered the line. The dragon entered slowly. The size of it required time. I held the position I was in, knees slightly bent, the line at the center of my forehead receiving the descending column of compressed thunder, and I watched the heavens' anger flow through a channel that the heavens themselves had built into me when they had given me the body they had given me. I was the channel. I had spent 2 lifetimes being a channel for someone else's plan. The first lifetime had been Ethan's. The plan had concluded with my death. The second lifetime had begun by being the channel for my own plan, by my own design, and the heavens had now decided I was a channel for them as well, and the heavens had not noticed yet that the channel ran in only one direction. The dragon entered. It did not exit. The 4th supreme divine treasure condensed in my dantian while the dragon was still discharging itself. The realm of king and marquis dropped away the way an old robe drops away. I crossed into true god realm without ceremony and without fanfare, the way a man crosses from one room to the next when there is nothing of significance about the doorway between them. A new comprehension arrived, the Spear of Hades, the first transformation of the divine elephant suppressing prison technique, the strongest single-use attack in the technique's repertoire, the form of force the technique could compress when its user had reached a sufficient cultivation level to wield it. I had not been at that level half an hour ago. I was at it now. The dragon's tail finished discharging into me. The thunderclouds above the valley reorganized themselves into a slow churning that did not look like a tribulation cloud anymore. The heavens had run out of the things they could throw at me without throwing the kind of thing that would also threaten the surrounding states. The heavens stopped throwing. The tribulation, in its formal sense, was over. The tribulation cloud, however, remained, and the lightning source inside the cloud, the central core that the heavens had used to power the entire 18-round event, was no longer a passive thing. The repeated channeling of its energy through me had given it, in the previous half hour, the small first stirring of consciousness. The lightning source had begun to think. I lowered my hands and looked up at it. 3 days passed. I sat in the cross-legged position the breakthrough required, on the valley floor, with the cloud over my head, and Marcus and Fahai patrolling the perimeter, while Victoria sat on the Kasaya at the edge of the formation. Cultivators came. Marcus and Fahai turned them back. Some of them recognized the Heavenmark sect connection in Victoria and turned themselves back. Some of them needed a Saint Level explanation. None of them got past the perimeter. The 4th supreme divine treasure stabilized inside my dantian. The divine soul that the true god breakthrough required condensed at the center of the consciousness sea and refused to disperse. The Spear of Hades that had arrived at the moment of breakthrough resolved into a stable technique I could deploy with a single thought. My giant elephant particle count finished the count it had started during the 18th bolt and stopped at 10 million. 10 million particles meant 1,000 dragons of strength. 3 days ago, I had been carrying 3. I opened my eyes on the 3rd evening. The cloud above me was still there. The lightning source inside the cloud had been waiting. I lifted my hand to the air. Come, the cloud came. It compressed. By the time it had finished compressing, the purple core of the source was hovering at the level of my forearm, the size of a closed fist, dense with consciousness, trembling. It did not have words. It had something the system was reading as proto-words. A small panel scrolled across the bottom of my vision, registering the source's state. Tribulation cloud has produced consciousness. Will be erased by lightning law within the count of 3 breaths if not absorbed. Recommend immediate decision. I addressed the source directly. The source could hear me. The system confirmed it could hear me. I told it, in the calm voice I had spent 2 lifetimes practicing on subordinates, that the lightning law would erase it the moment the tribulation finished, and that no entity in the realm except the man holding it had the authority to exempt it from that erasure. I told it I would consider sparing it, because a sentient lightning source had uses I could find applications for, but it had ruined a robe. The compensation, I said, was a robe. The source did not have words. It had whatever the equivalent of an enthusiastic agreement was in a thing that had been a cloud half an hour ago. The agreement registered. The cloud and the thunder pool and the residue of the 18-round tribulation merged in front of me into a suit of armor, purple at the chest and arms, silver-white along the line of the spine, with cloud and lightning patterns shifting across the surface of the metal, as though the surface had not yet finished deciding whether it was solid or weather. Punishment Thunder Emperor armor, I said. The armor recognized the name. The name fit. It folded itself onto me the way a thing settles into the shape it had been waiting to take. The lightning source, having delivered the armor, presented itself for the second part of its choice. I slapped it into the silver vertical line between my brows. The line flared once. The source went into me. The line braided permanently, silver and purple along its length, electric arcs flickering at the edges. I had absorbed the source fully. I had gained authority over ordinary tribulation lightning. I had not gained authority over supreme tribulation, but ordinary tribulation was now mine to use as I chose. The cloud above the valley dissipated. I stood up. The ground sank 100 feet under my weight. Marcus and Fahai approached from the perimeter together. They did not arrive at me at the same speed. Marcus arrived first. Fahai arrived a half-second behind, which was the appropriate hierarchy of arrival between a supreme saint and an early saint, and which was also the hierarchy Fahai had been carefully maintaining for the entire 3-day vigil. Both of them stopped at 6 paces and bowed. Both of them did the brief, involuntary thing of looking at me longer than was protocol. I had read about it in scrolls a previous lifetime had given me knowledge of the strange charm certain Tao body transformations placed on the people closest to them. The charm was not directed. The Tao body did not choose to deploy it. The Tao body simply had it, and people who had spent enough time in proximity to it experienced the charm whether they had asked for the experience or not. Marcus's mouth recovered first. "Young master," he said, his eyes finding the floor beside my left foot. "Your subordinate apologizes for the indelicate observation. There is no observation to apologize for." He bowed once, briefly. As the young master says, I let the silence sit long enough for him to recover his usual composure. Then I asked the question I had been planning to ask him. "From here, Marcus, will you follow me, or will you return to the Divine Martial sect to await orders from your master?" I asked. He did not hesitate. He bowed deeper than the bow he had used at first contact. He said the words a man says when the loyalty he carries has been the loyalty of his entire adult life, and the loyalty he is choosing now is the choice he has been waiting to be asked to make. This subordinate will follow the young master and stand at his side. I did not need to acknowledge it. He had known the answer before I had asked. I had asked because the formal naming of his position required the formal asking. I turned to Victoria. She had been kneeling on the Kasaya for 3 days without moving. The white robe was, by then, the only thing in the valley that was still entirely white. She lifted her face toward me with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for instructions and had no intention of asking when they would arrive. "You will return to the sect," I said, "and resume the duties Ethan assigns you. You will lie at his side as if nothing has changed." She bowed her head. "Do not let him take advantage of you." I let my voice quiet. "Do not give yourself away. You know what will happen if you do." She bowed lower. I lifted my eyes to the sky. I had the True God realm and the Punishment Thunder Emperor armor and the Spear of Hades and 1,000 dragons of strength, and Ethan, on Profound Peak, was sitting in a cultivation chamber a full realm and a half below me with damaged life essence and a remnant soul ancestor who could not see the system that was eating his fortune. I was not going to rush him. I was going to return to the sect, stabilize the cultivation that had jumped 3 realms in 3 days, and let the long game continue running on the schedule it had been keeping. I rose into the sky in the new armor. The valley closed itself behind me. Before Marcus opened the void to take us back to the sect, Victoria had asked her question. She had asked it shyly. The white robe she had spent 3 days kneeling in had been the same robe she carried into the sect afterward, and the eyes she had used in the asking were the eyes of a woman who had decided that the new shape of her loyalty meant she was now permitted to volunteer information rather than only answer questions. She had asked if there was anyone, besides Ethan, in our sect that she could keep an eye out for. People with the kind of luck Ethan had. People I might want to know about. I had said yes. She had named Hannah. I had asked her to repeat the name. She had repeated it. Hannah, the senior sister. The orphan Diana had adopted before I had been brought to the sect. The woman who had spent the previous 20 years almost entirely outside my notice because she had spent them almost entirely outside the events of Ethan's rise. Victoria's slave seal could not lie. Victoria had said her luck was second only to Ethan's. I had thanked her. She had folded the white robe around herself one careful inch and gone back to the sect through her own teleportation array. I had let her go. Then I had turned to Marcus. He had performed the spatial jump that brought the three of us in the time of one breath, from the southern border of the continent to the lower terrace of Profound Peak. I came out of the void with the dizziness that always accompanied my spatial jumps. The body of an anomaly resists translation more than ordinary cultivators, and I let the dizziness pass through me without comment. Fahai stood patiently at my elbow. Marcus apologized in advance for the discomfort he had not been responsible for. A figure was already waiting for us on the lower terrace, Elder Grace. I had seen her once in the past 3 months, at her rustic courtyard, the one she used to perform being ordinary in. The performance of ordinariness was not active today. She was standing in the middle of the path, with her arms folded inside her sleeves and a small straight sword at her hip, and her gaze did the polite but unmoving thing of a woman who had been informed there were 2 strangers approaching her peak and had decided to address the matter herself. Adrian, her eyes touched Fahai, then Marcus. The 2 behind you do not appear to be from our sect. Elder Grace. Fahai has been appointed guest elder of Profound Peak by my master. Marcus is approved to enter under my authority. They are of our circle. She studied my face for the count of 3 breaths. She did not study Fahai or Marcus. She studied my face. By the second breath, the small charm effect the punishment Heaven Dao body produced on people in close proximity had started to do its work, and her gaze adjusted half a degree away from me in the small, involuntary way of a cultivator who had detected something her training told her not to be detecting, and was not going to discuss it. She informed me, briefly, that Fenton had returned to the sect to challenge me. I told her I would handle it. She asked whether I was confident. I told her I had recently had a fortunate encounter, and reached a level she would have to verify herself. I let her verify. She verified. Her eyes did the wider involuntary thing, and she returned them to me, and she said, in a voice clipped slightly tighter than usual, that Hannah was at Swordcliffe, and that I should go visit her. I sent Fahai and Marcus to cultivate inside Pure Heart Palace. I went to Swordcliffe alone. Swordcliffe was where my master had once comprehended her sword. The cliff was a flat outcropping at the midsection of Profound Peak, wide enough to spar on, narrow enough to feel exposed. The drop on the south side opened onto the cloud line. The wind on the cliff was constant. There was a single woman standing at the edge. She heard me coming. She turned at the second to last step before I would have arrived behind her. Not soon enough to be reading my chui, not late enough to be unaware. The motion was the motion of a swordswoman whose body operated on the timing of a duel, even when there was no duel scheduled. Hannah. The system arrived in my vision before I could finish processing what my eyes had already registered. She was tall. She was thin in the way a sword is thin. Her hair was midnight black, drawn loose down her back, untied. The robe she wore was patterned with stars I could not read. Her eyes were the eyes of a phoenix in profile, sharp, narrow, and absolutely cold to anyone who had not been given the version of her face the inside of the cold did not reach. The system finished its scan. Hannah. Number of fate, 7,000. Affection toward host, adoration, realm, mid-stage true god. Innate fortune, destined female lead, 5.5 stars. Age increase aptitude, 5 stars. Born with sword heart, 4 stars. System reminder, deplete her life force before defeating her. Defeating her grants massive reward. Destined female lead, Ethan's. The hatred came up my throat with the same speed I had felt it come up the morning of the rebirth. It came up wider this time. It had 18 rounds of tribulation lightning to feed on. I held it. I closed my fist. I held it harder. The fist did not move. The face above the fist held its expression. The killing intent that had been gathering in my chest for the previous 10 seconds had nowhere safe to go and folded itself back down into the part of my body that was permitted to carry it. Hannah tilted her head 1/4 of a degree. She had felt it. Her sword heart had felt it. The eyes that had been the cold phoenix eyes a moment ago had narrowed slightly. The way they narrowed when the air around her body shifted in a direction her instincts had not predicted. Why are you angry? The question was not afraid. It was concerned. It was concerned the way a person who had spent 5 years thinking about you in private is concerned when you arrive in front of them carrying something heavy they cannot identify. I did not have a prepared answer. I had not prepared an answer because I had not prepared, on the way up the cliff, for the system to tell me what it had told me about the woman I had come up the cliff to meet. I had 2 seconds to decide what to do with the truth. I crossed the cliff to her. I crossed the cliff in 3 steps and put my arms around her. She did not resist. She had not been expecting it. I felt the small, involuntary stiffening of a swordswoman whose body had registered a movement her mind had not yet given permission for, and she did not resist. Her sword heart had felt the killing intent at my ribs and decided that the killing intent was not aimed at her. The body she stood in adjusted in the time it took me to close my arms, from defensive into something else. I am afraid. My voice was lower than the voice I used in sect meetings, more than I should be. I am afraid you are not mine. She stayed inside the embrace. She had spent 20 years on this cliff. She had spent 5 of those years, the ones since I had been brought to the sect, looking at me the way a cultivator with a sword heart looks at the man whose existence has registered as relevant to her cultivation. She had not, in those 5 years, given me any indication of what the relevance had been. She had not let on. She had also not stopped looking. The performance Adrian wore in the rest of the sect dropped on the cliff. It dropped because it could not stand on the cliff. The performance had no purchase against the way she looked at me. I love you, senior sister. The words came out without rehearsal. They had not been the words I had planned to say. The words had said themselves. She lifted her face up off my shoulder, and the cold phoenix expression had begun to do something with itself that the cold phoenix expression had not done before. It softened. The softening did not arrive easily. It arrived the way a thing arrives that has been waiting under the mask for a long time and has finally been told it is allowed. She kissed me. The kiss was the kind of kiss a swordswoman gives when she has been holding a sword heart at the center of her chest for 5 years and has just decided to put the sword down. There was no calculation in it. There was no performance. There was the precise warmth of a woman who had known me in private since before I had known her at all. The system, in its quieter font, scrolled through the bottom of my vision. Affection toward host upgraded. Adoration to unwavering. I said the next thing into her hair, where she would have to stay close to hear me. You are mine. From this evening, you do not belong to anyone else. If you try to leave me, I will kill you. Her arms tightened around my back. You are the first man to touch me. The voice was level. You will be the last. I entrust my life to you. The system scrolled again. Ethan, 3,000 fate transferred to host. I closed my eyes against the side of her head. The hatred I had carried up the cliff was still in my chest. The kiss had not removed it. The kiss had moved it. The hatred was now a thing I would carry on her behalf. I was going to use it. She separated from me a hand's distance. She did not separate further. The hand that had been on my back came up and touched the silver and purple line at the center of my forehead. The line responded the way it responded to people who were permitted to touch it, without resistance, with a small recognition. Her finger followed the line down to where it ended at the bridge of my nose. This is new, she said. 3 days ago, I said. A tribulation. She did not press for more. She let her hand drop. She brought both her hands to the front of her own chest, where the sword heart she had been carrying since birth sat in the deepest layer of her cultivation. She did the small inward motion a sword cultivator at her level does when she is about to take something out of herself that she had been told never to take out. Hannah, what are you doing? What I have been waiting to do, she said, and drew the sword heart. It came out as a small, bright thing, the size of a pearl, white-edged, golden inside, with the faint hum of a blade inside a sheath. The sword heart was the foundation of her entire cultivation. Removing it was not an injury. It was a transfer of life. She offered it to me on her open palm. This is what I was born with. Every cultivation I have done in my life is contained inside it. It was once the most important thing to me. I give it to you, and I hope you will not let it down. She lost 3,000 life force in the offering. I felt the loss on her, saw it in the slight pallor that arrived in her face the moment the sword heart left her chest. The system registered. The system named the cost. I took the sword heart from her palm. You are a fool. My voice did not steady the way I had wanted it to. And so am I. I drew, from the silver and purple line at the center of my forehead, half of the innate lightning source the punishment heaven Tao body carried. The part of the line that was the punishment heaven attribute itself, not the absorbed heavenly punishment source. The source split willingly. Half of it went into her chest where her sword heart had been. The lightning entered her. It rebuilt the part of her that had been hollowed by the gift. By the time it had finished, her aura had crossed 2 minor realms. She was at the peak of true God realm, 1 breath from becoming a half-saint. The pallor in her face had returned to the pale of her ordinary face. She had been crying silently. She did not stop. She tipped her head briefly against my shoulder. You are insane. That was your innate source. Half of it. Half of yours is still more than I deserve, she said. No. I tightened my grip on her hand. It is exactly what you deserve. I held her hand. She did not let go. I did the next thing while she was still resting against my shoulder. I closed my eyes. I opened the system. I navigated by the path I had taken many times before to the panel for innate fortune stripping, the function the system reserved for situations where a destiny attribute attached to one person needed to leave that person and be held in storage until a future use. I was about to use it on her. I told her, before I activated it, that I was about to use a system function on her and that she should not resist. She did not ask what the function did. She closed her eyes. She opened her sea of consciousness the way a cultivator opens a door to a room she trusts the person on the other side to enter cleanly. I commanded the strip. The system performed it. The stripping was clean. There was no flash of light visible to anyone outside the cliff. There was no cosmic phenomenon. The destined female lead attribute lifted out of her sea of consciousness like a thread being pulled from cloth, and the system stored it in its warehouse. And the only mark of its leaving was a faint sensory absence that even Hannah did not register as anything in particular. The system's voice came through fainter than usual. Innate destiny stripped. Destined female lead. Stored in system warehouse. Recommend release of stored attribute onto a different host before Heavenly Tao detects the imbalance. Time window. Flexible, but not infinite. The system was tired. I noted the warning. I closed the panel. I did not yet have a recipient in mind for the redirected attribute. I had time. I had the system's word that the time was not infinite, but it was not immediate either. I opened my eyes. Hannah was looking at me with an expression that did not contain awareness of what had just been removed from her. The destined female lead title had been a thing the world had assigned to her without her consent at the moment of her birth. She had not chosen it. She had not, in the previous 20 years, even known it was attached to her. The fact that it was no longer attached to her produced no perceptible loss. What it did produce was a small panel update, in my vision, that I read in silence. Acquired fortune, Thunder Source Awakening, 4.5 stars. Fusion of the half source I had given her with the inherent qui of her sword cultivation. The lightning had not just sustained her, it had become a new attribute of its own. She had given me her sword heart. She had received a thunder source. We had traded at a level the world did not have a category for. In Ethan's residence on the lower elevation of the peak, the system, in its automatic background process, was running the second update. Ethan, 3,000 fate transferred to host pool. Total fate stripped from Ethan to date, 10,000. He spat blood onto his cultivation mat. He did not know why. He had reached the point in the previous month at which the ongoing damage had stopped being able to surprise him. I closed the panel. I let it be. She let me put my head on her lap. It was a position I had not been in since I had been small enough to fit in my own mother's. Hannah, who had spent the previous 5 years on this cliff alone with her sword and her cultivation, did not seem surprised by the position. She put one hand against my temple. She did not move it. I let myself rest there, and I did the thing I had not done since the morning of the rebirth. I took stock honestly. Catherine was bound to me by heaven-witnessed vow. Her warmth toward me had not been a thing I had built. It had been a thing she had decided, and the decision had been made under conditions she had not fully understood, and the warmth was now real. I had her loyalty. I did not have a clean way to think about what I owed her in return. Victoria had been broken by me, and was now back at the sect performing as Ethan's elder while reporting to me. The breaking had been the breaking of a real person. The breaking would not undo itself. She had been competent and seductive and proud at the start of the encounter. She would not be those things again. Emily had been enslaved at the age of 18 by a man whose name she had not learned yet. She would carry that ownership for as long as the seal lasted, which was longer than her natural life. Sarah would defeat Ethan in their 3-year duel and would survive a fate I had read in the previous lifetime and rewritten in this one. She owed me her life. I had presented the bill before I had presented the rescue. Eleanor was managing a family I had reduced to my asset, and the woman whose lap my head was on, whose sword heart was in my chest, whose destined female lead attribute was sitting in a warehouse a system had warned me to empty soon, had given herself to me without any of the manipulations the others had been moved by, and she did not know that the woman she had given herself to was the kind of man who had moved the others. I had not earned this. I had taken it. The two were not the same word. I opened my eyes. Hannah was looking down at me with the small private smile she had only shown me on the cliff. I had not seen that smile on her face anywhere else in 2 lifetimes. The smile was for me. It was also the smile of a woman who had not yet learned what I had done to other women to get to her. I closed my eyes again. I let it be. The hypocrisy I was building had a shape. I was going to keep building it. The plan I had carried up the cliff was the same plan I had carried down. It was just heavier now. Tomorrow, I would think about Ethan. Tomorrow, I would think about Sarah's 3-year duel. Tomorrow, I would think about the destined female lead attribute sitting in the warehouse and where it should be released. Tonight, I let her hand stay on my temple. The wind on the cliff was constant. I rested. Diana was waiting for me in the sword tomb when I came back from Swordcliffe. She did not turn around when I entered. The sword across her back was the ceremonial one tonight. The hair that was usually loose in her own home had been gathered back at the nape. The kind of small adjustment a woman makes when she is about to give a thing she has been waiting 20 years to give. She did the only conversational sentence she would do that evening. "You went to Hannah." I did. She did not turn to look at me. She lifted one hand. From the wall behind her, a sword detached itself and crossed the floor in a slow, flat glide and stopped 6 inches from my chest. It was not a sword the way the swords on her walls were swords. It was a prison-suppressing greatsword, Blackstone, 6 feet long, etched with the same runes that ran along the prison-suppressing sword I had carried inside my dantian since my 5th name day. The two were a set. The set had been split for centuries. My family had carried the smaller half. The larger half had been here, in this room, in my master's keeping. The greatsword merged with the smaller piece I already carried. I felt the merge happen at the level of my dantian, the prison-suppressing sword peak forming from the union of the 2 pieces, a supreme-grade artifact taking shape out of the merger. The sword peak was the first supreme artifact I had ever held. The second piece had completed it. She finally turned around. "The set has 3 pieces," she said. "You now have 2. The third is the demon sealing jade seal. It has been in the keeping of the demon emperor's subordinates for the last 800 years. That makes me," I said, "a target." She did not look away. Yes, she crossed the floor to me. Her stride was the small, composed stride of a woman who had decided what she was going to say before she had decided to say it. "I will overlook Hannah," she said, "if you protect the artifact. If you eventually obtain the jade seal, I will." I let my hand find the place where the new sword had merged into the old. She did not bow. She did not soften. She also did not draw her own sword on me, which was, given the alignment of facts in the room, more generous than any other gesture would have been. "The set was prepared for your mother," she said. The line did not arrive as I had been expecting it to arrive. She delivered it sideways, in passing, as though she had decided I did not need it explained. I did not ask the questions her line invited. I bowed once. She turned back to her swords. I left the mystery palace with 2 pieces of a 3-piece artifact merged inside me. A master who had named my mother for the first time in 20 years, and a quest that had already been waiting for me before I had been told it existed. I sent for Emily at sunrise. She came to the outer terrace at the appointed hour, in the simple disciple attendant robe she now wore at the sect. Hair pulled back, the way Ethan preferred it pulled back. Eyes lowered, the way an attendant's eyes are lowered. She walked to the small stone bench in the middle of the terrace, and she stopped 2 paces from me, and she did not speak. I told her to kneel. She knelt. I told her to lower the back of her head. She lowered it. I sat on the bench and rested my forearm against her back, the way a man rests his arm on the back of a chair he has used for years. The position was a position I had not prepared. It had arrived on its own. She did not stiffen under the weight. She had spent the previous months training her body for the moment her master would treat her as the furniture his trust permitted her to be. I let the moment hold. Then I drew, from the system warehouse, the attribute the system had stored for me at the end of the previous evening. Destined female lead. The attribute had been Luo Hannah's at her birth. It had been removed from her without her awareness on Swordcliffe. It had spent the night in a system pocket the system had warned me to empty before the heavenly Dow began to investigate the absence. I released it onto Emily. The release was clean. It went into her sea of consciousness without resistance. The system registered the new location. Emily's panel updated. Her innate fortune line, which had been blank since I had enslaved her at the start of the operation, populated with a single new entry. Destined female lead, 5.5 stars. The system marked her as Ethan's destiny. She did not feel it. I told her then what the next 6 months of her life were going to look like. She would return to Ethan's quarters at the end of this terrace meeting. She would resume her duties. She would, over the coming weeks, allow Ethan to begin to feel a thing he had not previously felt, a deep, growing attachment to the maid he had brought to the sect, the kind of attachment a child of destiny feels toward a woman the world has decided to give him. She would allow the attachment to deepen. She would not not let it consummate. She would never, under any condition, sleep with him. She would belong to me. He would feel it without understanding what it was. She bowed her head against the stone of the terrace floor. The bow she gave was the bow of a young woman who had been told the shape of the work she was about to do, and had decided, with the absolute precision of a slave seal at maximum function, to do exactly that. Yes, master. I rose from the bench. I left her on the terrace. The intelligence arrived through Eleanor's communication stone. The message was clean, the way Eleanor's communications always were. It conveyed 3 facts in the order of their importance. The first fact was that the crown prince of the Soulfire dynasty, a young man named Hugo, son of the Soulfire Emperor, an established figure in the regional politics of the Southeast, had arrived at Westgate the previous evening. The second fact was that he had wanted a sword manual the Lion family was reputed to hold. The third fact was that when the Lion family had not given it to him, he had taken Sarah as leverage and killed her protector, a cultivator named Xavier, whom the Lion family had assigned to her as a guardian after the slave seal arrangements had been set up. To demonstrate the seriousness of his demand, Eleanor added at the end of the message a small line of context. She wrote, in the careful tone of a matriarch who knew what her young master valued, that Sarah had spent the night in a Soulfire holding cell. She wrote that the holding cell was being kept under the supervision of a saint-level bodyguard named Wallace, who was the Crown Prince's personal protector. She wrote that the body of Xavier had been thrown to the Lion compound's gate in the early morning, and that the compound was now under siege by Soulfire forces threatening annihilation if the sword manual was not produced. She wrote finally that she awaited the young master's instructions. I read the message twice. I did not need to read it 3 times. The math arrived on the second reading. Hugo had touched my proxy. He had done so without knowing that the Lion family was no longer the Lion family, that it was now a holding I had purchased with violence, a household whose individual lives belonged to the man whose seal sat in their consciousness, and that the daughter he had taken was the cultivator I had personally cultivated for the duel against Ethan. The Crown Prince of the Soulfire dynasty had not, as far as I could tell, been told whom he was working for when he had decided to work alone. He was about to be told. I closed the stone. I called Fahai out of the void, told him to bring the Zen staff, and cross the sect's outer formation in the direction of Westgate. I came down on the flagstones outside the Lion compound at the height of Hugo's third demand. The Crown Prince was standing in front of a void chariot, a Soulfire signature transport, gold-trimmed and obvious, with Wallace a half-pace behind him, and a small detachment of armored Yan soldiers in a loose perimeter. The corpse of Xavier, the protector Eleanor had named in her message, had been laid out in the middle of the flagstones with the kind of theatrical placement that demanded the Lion family treat the corpse as a message rather than a person. A Soulfire banner had been planted next to the body. Hugo was in the middle of an opening cultivation strike when I arrived. The strike was directed at the gate. The gate was an old gate. The gate had been holding for the previous 8 hours because Eleanor had been holding it. I stopped the strike with the Thunder Emperor finger. The technique came up my right arm and out my index finger in the time it took the Crown Prince's strike to finish completing itself. The compressed lightning intercepted his cultivation attack 3 feet before the gate. The two collided. The collision unmade the strike. The shockwave threw the perimeter soldiers backward and ruined the void chariot's polished surface, and made the Crown Prince's robe move in a way the Crown Prince had not authorized. The flagstones around me went still. The Westgate Lord, who had been standing on the upper balcony of the city wall watching the siege without intervening, performed the small, involuntary motion of a man who had just realized his negligence had become the explicit subject of a senior cultivator's attention. I lifted my hand. The city lord did not finish his next sentence. He did not finish his life either. The punishment heaven true eye in my left socket discharged once. The balcony he had been standing on no longer had a man on it. The stone he had been standing on no longer had a balcony. I looked at Hugo. Return Sarah, now, I said. He did not return Sarah. He produced an expression that was meant to be authoritative and arrived only as the first stage of recalculation. He tried to invoke his father's name. He tried to invoke the dynasty's name. He tried, in the small, embarrassed way of a young man who had not been corrected since adolescence, to issue a statement about diplomacy. Wallace, beside him, said nothing. Wallace was a saint-level cultivator who had measured my realm in the time it had taken the Thunder Emperor finger to land. Wallace was the only person on the flagstones who had not yet made a mistake. Sarah was carried out of the void chariot by 2 of Hugo's officers. On Hugo's nodded order, 4 breaths later. She was bruised. She was not dead. Her hands were bound. Eleanor received her at the gate, cut the bindings with a casual sword stroke, and brought her inside the compound. I did not look away from Hugo. Now, I leveled my eyes at him. We discussed what you owe. Hugo had been raised on the assumption that a crown prince of the Soulfire dynasty did not owe. He had not been corrected on that assumption since he was a child. The correction was overdue. He produced from inside his robes the bronze sacred lamp that was his family's signature artifact, an heirloom of the Soulfire dynasty, capable of compressing concentrated fire cultivation into a single focused dragon. He activated it. A blood-red fire dragon erupted from the lamp's mouth. The dragon was a real attack. I let him commit to it. I waited until the dragon's full length had unspooled from the lamp and had begun the strike. Then I deployed the Spear of Hades. The spear was the technique the breakthrough on Hollow Valley had given me, the first transformation of the divine elephant suppressing prison force, the strongest single-use attack in the technique's repertoire. 3 days of practice with it had been enough to fire it. It came up my right arm and out my open palm in the form of a focused column of compressed force, and it pierced the fire dragon along the dragon's central axis, and the dragon came apart from inside. The spear continued past the unmade dragon and traveled toward Hugo. Wallace stepped between us. The saint-level bodyguard caught the spear on his own cultivation. The catch cost him significantly. His feet sank 6 inches into the flagstones. His forearms, where the spear had hit, registered a crack pattern of fractures that the cultivation underneath could not fully contain. He held the spear long enough for it to dissipate. He looked at me with an expression I had to give him credit for. He had not panicked. Fahai came out of the void at my left. He did not need a signal. He had been waiting for the moment when the Saint-Level bodyguard had committed enough of his body to a defensive technique to be vulnerable to a flanking strike. The sky-piercing Zen staff arrived at Wallace's temple from a direction Wallace had not been watching. The Buddhist artifact's power was on the staff. Wallace, holding off the residue of the spear with his forearms, did not have the cultivation reserve to also block the staff. Fahai's strike was the strike of a saint who had been waiting for a chance to demonstrate his saint level to the bodyguard who had been the only saint in the courtyard a moment ago. Wallace did not survive the strike. Hugo, with his protector gone, looked very young. I did not give him time to invoke a third deity. He activated the Law Decree. It was an emergency artifact, a wax-sealed stone tablet his father had given him for absolute extremity, designed to summon the Soulfire Emperor's Dharma image into the immediate vicinity of the holder. The seal cracked. The tablet flared. The sky above the flagstones tore on a vertical line, and the Flame Emperor's projection, full size, robed in fire, the cultivation aura of an actual supreme being, descended through the tier with a sword in his right hand, and an expression that suggested the Soulfire Emperor had been informed which crown prince was about to die. Marcus and Fahai were knocked back by the projection's ambient pressure. I held my ground. The projection looked at me. He produced a sentence that had the cadence of a man preparing to make a threat that the size of his projection had already finished making for him. I produced a small portion of my full cultivation aura against him. The projection paused. He had not been given the briefing on what level of supreme he was actually facing across the flagstones. He registered with the slow, involuntary correction of a supreme who had assumed he would be dealing with a true god, that the cultivator across from him was operating at a level the projection's transmission could not fully address. He still had the diplomatic option. He used it. He produced the sentence the dynasty had prepared for moments of this type, an apology for his junior sister's impulsive sword, the formal statement that the Soulfire Emperor was prepared to compensate for the Crown Prince's overreach. He named compensation: 10 heavenly flame jade, 100 precious medicines, the standard apology bundle of a dynasty that had made a regional mistake. I did not accept the standard bundle. I let my voice carry across the flagstones. The Crown Princess, send her to me as compensation. The projection's expression did the specific thing the expression of a supreme being does when the phrase "the Crown Princess" has just been delivered as a demand for reparations rather than as a request for a marriage alliance. He said the dynasty would not. The dynasty, I said, will. A second tier opened above the flagstones, separate from the first. Diana descended through it. She did not introduce herself. She did not need to. The Flame Emperor's projection knew exactly who had just arrived. Behind her, a third tier opened, older, slower, the kind of tier that took a supreme more than a beat to produce. And Sect Master Solomon stepped through it with the same small smile he had worn the morning he had named me Dowchild. The Flame Emperor's projection was now standing in front of 3 supreme-level entities, one of them his son's enemy, 2 of them backing the enemy. The math, again, was clean. He agreed to the Crown Princess. He agreed to the Heavenly Flame Jade. He agreed to the precious medicines. He agreed to deliver the entire apology package within 3 days. The projection then folded itself shut, taking the Crown Prince with it through the original tear, and the sky above the flagstones returned to the color of an ordinary dusk. Diana looked at me. She did not say anything. She had not come down to say anything. She had come down to perform the standing. Solomon smiled at me. He inclined his head a fraction and rose back through his tear without comment. I stood on the flagstones with Fahai at my left and the corpse of Wallace at my right, and the Lion compound gate undamaged behind me, and the City Lord's balcony missing from the wall to my far right, and I noted that the Soulfire Emperor had just publicly transferred his daughter-in-law to me as an apology gift. I noted the math of it. Marcus, who had been knocked back by the projection's pressure, picked himself up off the flagstones and informed me, in a voice that had the small subterranean quality of a man who had been personally insulted by a cosmic projection, that he intended to go home and discuss the matter with his master. I did not stop him. Marcus did not return alone. He had spent the previous 3 days at the Divine Martial Sect, the affiliated force of the Adrian clan his master had built, the organization Marcus had originally been Grand Elder of before he had become my retainer. He had presented to his master a single formal request. The master had presented the request to 7 other ancient sects with whom the Divine Martial Sect maintained alliances. The request was a specific one: lend their forces in formation against a target the Adrian clan had named. The coalition that arrived above the Soulfire Imperial City on the 3rd day was not a small one. 8 ancient sects, their supreme cultivators in the front ranks, their god kings in the second, their lower disciples below. The combined formation could have leveled a continent. The sky above the Imperial City had not held this much condensed cultivation since the founding of the dynasty. Marcus descended to my level above the city wall and bowed deeper than he had bowed at any previous moment. Young master, his voice did not waver. The Adrian clan banner is raised. The dynasty has been informed that the apology presented to the master was insufficient. I had not asked for this. I let him have it anyway. Marcus, who had spent 20 years performing the small obsequious dance of a Grand Elder, was now performing the larger and more dangerous dance of a man whose master had been personally insulted by the Soulfire Emperor's projection. The dance was not directly mine. The dance was the dance of the Adrian clan's larger machinery, a machinery that had been waiting since my punishment Heaven Dao body activation for a sufficient pretext to demonstrate its existence to the surrounding states. The pretext had arrived. I did not stop the dance. I sent a single message through the communication stone Eleanor had given me. The message instructed Emily, at the sect, to monitor whether Ethan was paying attention to the Soulfire event. The reply came back fast. He was paying attention. He was paying it carefully. He was performing concern about supply networks. He had not yet identified the connection between the dynasty's collapse and his senior brother's name. Below us, the Imperial City began the slow process of recognizing what was about to happen to it. Inside the Imperial Palace, the Soulfire Emperor was attempting to brief his court on a situation his court did not yet have the information to comprehend. The Empress, a woman the Slim Index had named Evelyn, was advising negotiation. The Emperor was past negotiation. The 8 sects above the city had not come to negotiate. The 8 sects had come to demonstrate. I sent one final order through Marcus. The order was that the Empress was to be removed from the city before the strike. She was to be brought to me. Marcus transmitted the order. The 8 sects waited until the Empress had been extracted, escorted out of the city by a small honor guard, and delivered to my position above the wall. She arrived in the formal robes of a woman who had been told she was being kidnapped and had decided, with the practiced resignation of a 30-year veteran of palace politics, to be kidnapped with dignity. The 8 sects then struck. The strike took approximately the time of one breath. The Imperial City of the Soulfire Dynasty, a structure that had stood for 900 years, capital of one of the Southeast's 7 major dynasties, home to 2.5 million ordinary residents, ceased to exist as a single coordinated structure. The walls came down. The palace came down. The interior districts collapsed inward. The strike was precise enough that the surrounding farmland did not burn. The strike was thorough enough that the dynasty did not, as a polity, survive the day. I did not watch the entire strike. I watched enough of it to confirm completion. Then I turned to Evelyn, who had been standing at my elbow with her hands folded inside her sleeves and her face arranged in the dignified expression of an empress who had just lost her empire, and I told her, in the same quiet tone I had used with Sarah the first night I had taken the Lion family, that she would be coming with me to the sect. She bowed her head. as the young master commands. I came back to the sect at the end of the second day after the strike. The official version of the event, the version the surrounding states were being told by the Adrian clan's information channels, was that the Soulfire dynasty had insulted the Adrian clan young master, that the dynasty had been given an opportunity to apologize, that the apology had been insufficient, and that the Adrian clan had taken the action it had taken in proportion to the insult. The official version was almost true. It omitted the specific sequence in which Marcus had taken the action that Marcus had taken without my direct order, but the omission was the kind of omission a powerful family preferred to maintain in its public reporting. I left Evelyn at the Lion compound to be received properly into Eleanor's management. She would be trained and integrated. Her fate attributes, when I checked them on the system panel that evening, included one entry I had not seen on a panel before: Empress's Fortune, 5 stars. She had carried it her entire adult life. I would harvest it in due course. I came up through the lower courtyards of Profound Peak in the early evening. A figure was waiting for me at the path junction, exactly where the path junction always placed the figure: Ethan. He had arranged his face for a senior brother's return from a difficult business trip. The arrangement was the same arrangement he had been wearing for me in every interaction since the rebirth. The face produced the words it had been preparing while it waited at the junction. He thanked me. He thanked me in language that managed to be both grateful and concerned for the intervention I had performed against the Soulfire Crown Prince. He had been worried. He had heard rumors. He understood, he said this carefully, that the intervention had been on behalf of a regional family the Adrian clan had recently taken under their protection, and he wanted to convey his admiration for a senior brother who had stood up so decisively for those who depended on him. I let him finish his sentence. I appreciate junior brother's words, I said. The intervention was simply what the situation required. Sarah is a young cultivator with a duel scheduled in less than 3 weeks. It would have been unfortunate for her to be lost before she had the chance to demonstrate her cultivation. He paused on the line about the duel. He recovered. The recovery was almost as good as the original face. He made the small joke about whether the duel would now be an even one, with everything that had happened. He bowed his head about 3 degrees. He told me, in the warm voice of a junior brother who was sincerely worried about his cultivation, that he had not been making the progress he had hoped to make. Continue your effort. I let the small encouraging smile arrive on my face, exactly as a senior brother's smile would arrive. I am sure junior brother will achieve the breakthrough you deserve. He thanked me. He bowed. He turned, walking backward 2 steps before turning fully. The small theatrical retreat of a man who had successfully completed a social transaction, and he climbed the next bend of the path back toward his quarters. I watched him go. The system, in its smaller font, scrolled an automatic update. Total fate stripped from target Ethan to date, 10,000. Cultivation foundation damage, ongoing. Destined female lead attribute now bound to enslaved double agent in target's intimate circle. Subdue progress, on schedule. I closed the panel. The wind on the peak was constant. I let myself stand in it for a long minute. Behind me, the empire I had erased had been an empire for 900 years. Below me, the maid I had planted at the start of the operation was now the destined heroine of the man whose path she would close. The mother of the man was bound to me by heaven-witnessed vow. His master, his guardian elder, his fated love, all of them were mine. He had nothing left. He had not noticed. He would not notice for some time yet. By the time he noticed, his cultivation would be a stage too low to do anything about it, and the destiny he had been born into would be sitting in a system warehouse I had emptied into a slave the world considered his beloved. I had spent 2 lifetimes serving him. I was finished serving. I walked into my palace. The door closed behind me. The board stood as I had built it. The next move was his to make. I did not expect him to make it well.